Our story begins in a desolate and completely snow-covered place. In this white desert lives a monster, a giant serpent that eats glaciers. There is also a terrifying gray bear capable of causing earthquakes, and even a bizarre rat that has the ability to pollute the seas. But an emperor who returned alive from this desolate place said something surprising. He claimed that the most dangerous thing in this location isn't the monsters. In the white desert, a large explosion suddenly occurs, breaking the silence. Soon, we see a white-haired man jump in to attack a giant scorpion. The impact of his blow generates a huge wave of energy that destroys everything around. Meanwhile, another man watches the fight and clenches his hand tightly. Suddenly, a bald, muscular guy is struck squarely by the monster. Another warrior then lands in the snow, preparing to join the battle as well. The creature wastes no time and advances quickly toward the new challenger. The man holds his axe firmly, ready to face the approaching threat. He delivers a powerful blow with his weapon, creating several energy slashes in the air. Someone comments that only a barbarian would be proud to show off his ignorance like that. He wonders how much longer he will have to put up with being around these brutes. A girl then asks what ignorance is and if it's something she can eat. Meanwhile, another member of the group eats the monster's venom with a smile. He seems to really enjoy the green goo, eating as if it were a delicious snack. The group leader then scolds him, saying he warned him not to eat the venom. Annoyed, he complains that in less than a week, they have already eaten all the venom he gave them. The young woman then says it was a noble challenge, and they proudly give a thumbs up. This childish attitude makes the group leader completely lose his patience with them. Suddenly, the venom starts to take effect, and Greta begins to foam at the mouth. The big guy then passes out and collapses, leaving the girl in a complete panic. Seeing the scene, the leader just sighs warily, as if he had expected it. Desperate, the girl starts slapping Greta's face, trying to wake him up. The gray-haired man just ignores the scene and turns his back to leave. Walking through the snow, he thinks that this was not the life he wanted to have. In a flashback, we see that he quit his job to travel the world in search of adventure. The young man traveled to the most extreme places, even reaching the center of the planet. His journey of adventures led him to the southernmost point of the globe. Frustrated, he prayed every night to go to a fantasy world, and one day his wish came true. Cutting the scene, we see a carriage in the snow with a man complaining loudly about the cold. A companion tells him to bundle up properly if he doesn't want to turn into a popsicle. The soldier complains that even with the reward, crossing the white desert is madness. The captain tells him to be quiet and reminds him that everyone there agreed to the mission. The soldier then replies that they didn't know the situation would be this bad. Inside a heated room, an old man in a suit hears the complaint and gets annoyed. The old man in the suit then clears his throat to interrupt the conversation. He then asks the blue-haired young woman if she is feeling well. With a gentle smile on her face, she replies that she is, and there's nothing to worry about. This is Mafina of the Akasha family, and she assures him she is fine despite the cold outside. The butler looks out the window and gets irritated by the guards' rude complaints. Mafina asks him to take it easy, as they are the only ones who agreed to escort them. Worried, she suggests letting them in for a bit, as they look frozen. Outside, the soldiers shiver from the cold, struggling not to turn into popsicles in the blizzard. The man refuses the idea immediately and reminds her of what lives in the white desert. The young woman lowers her head and mentions the monsters, remembering an old story. A long time ago, a greedy emperor decided he would conquer the white desert. He led an army with countless soldiers and personally entered the place. Years later, when his empire had already fallen, he returned alone and broken. Looking decades older and out of his mind, he said the monsters weren't the worst part. The most dangerous thing of all in that desolate place were the fearsome barbarians. A dark aura surrounds the barbarian's silhouette, showing how dangerous they are. Back in the present, the butler says that this story is nothing more than a silly legend. Mafina disagrees, as many of the creatures the emperor described were real. The old man smiles and says that despite that, there has never been a single report of a barbarian. The blue-haired girl agrees that this is true, leaving a mystery in the air. Suddenly, the captain tells everyone to stop, as he felt something strange approaching. He warns that there's something in the snow, and one of his men asks what it could be. The group leader squints, trying to see better through the blizzard. In the distance, they can make out a silhouette, but the snow obstructs the view. The captain becomes tense and says he has some good news and some bad news. One of the soldiers tells him to spit it out, and he explains that the good news is that it's small. The bad news is that the mysterious thing is coming toward them. Mafina and the other soldiers are completely shocked by the revelation. Even the butler, who thought himself superior, is visibly concerned. One of the soldiers then readies his sword for a possible imminent combat. The captain watches the figure approach with a nervous look, breaking into a cold sweat. He finally realizes that the silhouette actually looks like a human. The strong wind blows, revealing the mysterious man's white hair. The figure wears a claw necklace and has a muscular, well-defined body. When he finally gets closer, his identity is revealed to everyone. The soldiers panic when they realize it is a barbarian. The man stares at the group, his purple eyes glowing intimidatingly. He says he went out for a walk because he was tired of seeing the other barbarians. A sarcastic smile forms on his face, making everyone even more tense. He introduces himself as ActionToon and says it's a pleasure to meet them. The barbarian observes the group from the side with a calm and calculating gaze. He asks if they are merchants, and the captain confirms, stuttering. Ashen deduces that the men are hired guards, and the blonde man confirms again. The young man then suggests they turn back but highly doubts they will. This suggestion leaves the group leader visibly annoyed and defensive. Suddenly, the barbarian notices that someone is hidden inside the carriage. The camera focuses on the carriage window, heightening the tension of the moment. Mafina then peeks her head out of the door with a worried look. The captain is surprised and nervous that he noticed the noblewoman's presence. With a wide smile, Ashen says he would also like to be hired. The captain and his soldier are completely shocked by the unexpected request. The young man asks if he wasn't clear and offers to help them cross the desert. Suspicious, the blonde man asks if he isn't hostile and what his intentions are. Ashen replies that if he were hostile, they would all be gone by now. This terrifying answer leaves the mercenaries wide-eyed with fear. One of the soldiers calls out to the captain, not knowing how to react to the situation. The group leader clenches his hand, seemingly making a difficult decision. He then turns to the carriage and asks if the young lady heard the conversation. Mafina confirms and asks what on earth is happening out there. The captain explains a proposal and asks what she wants to do about it. Mafina remains silent for a moment, thinking about the barbarian's proposal. She then asks what the outcome would be if they tried to fight him. The captain answers honestly that he personally would not recommend a fight. After thinking for a bit, the young woman finally makes a decision and accepts the offer. The mercenary leader nods in agreement and prepares to give the answer. He then turns and walks slowly through the snow toward the mysterious man. Approaching the young man, he informs him that the noblewoman has accepted his offer of help. Upon hearing the positive response, a smile of satisfaction appears on the barbarian's face. With a confident look, he says that this is great news for everyone there. The gray-haired man's reaction makes the mercenaries even more suspicious. Suddenly, Ashen appears in front of the captain, who is startled by his speed. The young man tells him to relax, as he needs to speak with the person in charge. The blonde man becomes tense and stares at the barbarian with a look of pure distrust. He warns him that if he tries any funny business with the noblewoman, he will regret it. The gray-haired man just ignores the threat and continues walking calmly. One of the soldiers asks if it's safe to let him meet her alone. Another mercenary suggests they should try to stop him somehow. The captain says it's ridiculous to even think about facing a monster like him. Inside the carriage, the butler freaks out, but Mafina tells him to calm down. The young woman then gets a fright when she hears Ashen's voice asking to come in. The butler's reaction is one of pure panic, and he starts screaming desperately. Mafina ignores the old man's outburst and calmly allows the barbarian to enter. A victorious smile appears on Ashen's face upon receiving permission. Meanwhile, the butler is terrified and starts to break into a cold sweat over the situation. The gray-haired man then enters the carriage to talk with the noblewoman. Calmly, he asks the old man in the suit to calm down a bit. He assures them he doesn't want to harm them, but the butler doesn't believe him one bit. Mafina, on the other hand, is surprised to be in the presence of a legendary barbarian. She greets him nervously, and the young man replies that the pleasure is all his. Ashen comments that he is surprised by how warm it is inside the carriage. The girl explains somewhat awkwardly that the heating is done through magic. The young man becomes curious and thinks that magic really does exist in this world. He says the place is dangerous and offers to protect everyone's life. The young woman is surprised to hear that he has a condition for helping them. The butler also becomes tense and suspicious of the barbarian's condition. Mafina then asks what the condition is and what he desires in return. The young man reveals that he desires knowledge about the world outside the snowlands. He states that the only thing he wants is the information she possesses. The young woman is surprised by the request and repeats what he just said. With a sly smile, he says it's not a bad deal for her. The young woman thinks that she doesn't really have much of a choice in this situation. With few options, the young woman says she understands and agrees to the deal. The barbarian smiles satisfied and then asks what her name is. The young woman introduces herself as Melina of House Akasha in a formal tone. He introduces himself as Ketil and says he is looking forward to working with her. In a flashback, we see that Ketil always dreamed of living in a fantasy world. One day he woke up as a barbarian in a snowy field with no time to understand. The place was cold and full of monsters, so he led his tribe to survive. He doesn't even know how much time has passed, but he tried for years to escape that place. However, something seemed to be preventing him from leaving, and he punches an invisible barrier. A system window informs him that he can only leave after completing a mission. He couldn't leave, but when he was about to give up, visitors appeared. It was at that moment that the young man finally realized something very important. The world outside the snow was the fantasy world he had so dreamed of knowing. From then on, he started taking the missions seriously to be able to leave soon. He completed several missions, taking out monsters with the determination to leave. Back in the present, he explains that information from the outside is very precious. But most of the humans he encountered either went mad or attacked him. He is happy to finally talk to someone civilized and not a barbarian. The young man then closes his eyes and comments that they seem to be transporting weapons. The young woman is surprised by the revelation and asks how he knew about the weapons. The young man explains that his hearing is so good he can hear the steel in the wagons. He then asks if there is a war out there, and she confirms that the Empire and the Kingdom are fighting. Melina says that the Empire is huge, but the Kingdom is managing to resist bravely. The young woman reveals that this is thanks to a sword master and a hero on the frontier. Ketil becomes curious about the titles and asks what powers they possess. She then asks if he doesn't know about the mysteries, and he confirms that he doesn't. The girl says she doesn't know all the details, but explains about a power called Mystery. Few people can use this power, and they are divided into 5 levels of strength. Level 3 is for those who can only sense the power of mystery. Level 2 is for people who can finally use this power. Level 1 includes knights and mages who manifest mystery as mana or aura. The transcendentals are capable of splitting the sky, and the sword master is one of them. And finally comes the hero, a legendary existence that can influence the world. The young woman finishes by saying that even a mere level 3 is already quite powerful. Suddenly, Kettle declares that he wants to meet these people, leaving Melina shocked. The barbarian explains that he doesn't even remember how long he's been trapped there, just surviving. He only knows that he's in a snowy field in the fantasy world he so dreamed of. With a determined look, he reveals that he greatly desires to leave that place. He then says no, and a mysterious smile forms on his face. Looking at his reflection in the window, he says firmly that he needs to get out of that place. The young woman then takes the opportunity to ask if he is really a barbarian. The young man confirms and says that from her reaction, he already imagined she knew of him. Melina reveals that yes, and that it's because of the famous legend about him. Surprised, the gray-haired man asks if there really is a legend about him. The young woman is shocked to realize the barbarian didn't know about his own legend. He laughs upon hearing the story and says he thought the emperor was just a crazy person. He then confirms that the legend is true, as others have appeared there before. The young man then changes the subject and asks why they are passing through there. The young woman gets nervous with the question and hesitates to give a clear answer. Sadly, she reveals that they need a lot of money to solve a problem. She says that her family was rich but was sabotaged and is now in debt. The barbarian deduces that to pay the debt, they sell weapons to the kingdom. The young woman is completely shocked and asks how he managed to guess. He explains that since the kingdom needs weapons, the price rises with the demand. The young man continues and deduces that their territory borders the empire. The girl confirms his theory with a look of pure shock on her face. She thinks that the legend described him as a savage and asks who he is. The young woman starts to tremble and doubt if he is really a barbarian. Suddenly, the carriage sways abruptly, interrupting the tense conversation. The butler is startled by the sudden jolt and asks what happened. With the shock, the poor old man faints on the carriage floor right away. Kettle looks out the window and calmly announces that they have unwanted guests. Outside, a giant black goo monster appears and stares at the mercenaries. The captain and his men are completely terrified of the bizarre creature. Melina is also shocked and recognizes the monster as a black slime. The barbarian wonders if that is really the name of that gooey creature. The young woman confirms that the monster is documented in several ancient records. She explains that the survivors of the desert recorded the monsters they saw. The girl then asks if Kettle also knows the creature from the records. With a smile, he says yes and that they are edible and make great snacks. The young woman is horrified and asks with disgust if he really eats the monsters. He teases her by asking if she wants to try some, and she refuses immediately. Meanwhile, the goo monster attacks the mercenaries without any mercy. One of the men screams in terror as the creature approaches to attack. Desperate, Melina calls out for Kettle, asking him to do something. The barbarian, however, remains calm and doesn't move a single inch. He then reminds her of the contract they made a few moments ago. The young man says he will only act when there is a real danger to her life. The girl is confused by the answer and asks what he means. He explains that the mercenaries can handle it and that he needs to assess the world's level. Outside, the goo creature lets out a terrifying scream and stares at the men. The captain then screams desperately for his soldiers to use their shields. One of the men responds quickly and prepares to obey the order. He blocks the blow with his shield, but the monster's strength is too great. The soldier is dragged backward by the creature's force and struggles not to fall. The goo throws him far with a powerful attack, showing its absurd strength. Another mercenary takes the chance and attacks the monster with his axe. He lands a direct hit, but the creature's goo cushions the impact of the blow. The weapon gets stuck in the goo, and the soldier is shocked by the situation. The monster then turns to the captain and prepares for a new attack. The leader shouts that the creature only moves in a straight line and tells them to spread out. One of the soldiers obeys and prepares for a coordinated attack with the group. The other mercenary also confirms the order and readies himself for battle. The men begin to spread out in the snow to surround the giant creature. A soldier in a green hood then runs toward the monster with his spear. He leaps into the air and prepares a downward attack against the goo. His blow cuts the creature, which lets out a cry of pain from the surprise attack. The goo becomes furious with the wound, and its eyes glow with anger. Suddenly, the soldier's spear begins to glow with a green energy. The soldier then throws his spear with all his might toward the monster. The weapon hits the creature squarely but doesn't seem to cause much damage to the goo. The goo monster regenerates quickly and continues advancing on the mercenaries. Running with his sword, the captain shouts not to stop attacking the creature. He then jumps and delivers a powerful slash with his glowing blade at the enemy. The leader warns that normal attacks don't work and tells them to aim for the goo's core. Several energy slashes are seen in the air, showing the power of the captain's attack. He raises his sword high, concentrating a large amount of energy in it. Then, the blonde man launches a devastating attack that creates a huge explosion of light. The creature's red core is hit directly and shatters from the blow. Without its core, the goo monster's body begins to melt on the snowy ground. One of the soldiers looks at the scene, relieved but visibly tired from the battle. The mercenaries celebrate the victory and shout with joy for having survived. Melina is also very happy that they managed to defeat the creature. Kettle just watches the celebration with a serious and unimpressed look. Suddenly, a giant white wolf appears and interrupts the group's celebration. A hooded soldier shouts for his companions to aim for the monster's neck. Another mercenary advances with his weapon glowing blue, ready for combat. The warrior with the axe attacks the giant wolf's paw without a second thought. The creature retaliates and hits one of the soldiers, who is seriously injured in the attack. One of the soldiers comments that the desert isn't as bad as the legends say. The captain, however, warns them not to let their guard down as they haven't reached the halfway point. A hooded soldier doubts Kettle's strength, saying they are just legends from the Emperor. The young man begins to think that Kettle is just taking advantage of them on this journey. The mercenary suggests that they should at least test the barbarian's skills. Inside the carriage, Melina is confused upon hearing the mercenary's conversation. Kettle, on the other hand, remains with a serious expression without saying a single word. The hooded soldier then approaches the carriage to speak with the nobleman. He says that as mercenaries, it's natural for them to want to test Kettle's strength. The young woman thanks them for accepting the job, but the soldier doesn't seem convinced. The young man says there is one thing he cannot accept at all. He complains that the barbarian hasn't fought a single time since joining the group. The soldier then asks for permission to test if Kettle deserves the special treatment. The young woman is hesitant about the idea of a test and doesn't know what to answer. She turns to the captain for help, but he seems to agree with the soldier. The group leader says he tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen at all. Kettle then cracks a smile and says they want to test his skills. He claims not to mind the test but says it won't be possible right now. The barbarian looks up and warns that they have guests before the mercenary. Suddenly, red eyes appear in the darkness, and a voice says the mortals have arrived. The hooded soldiers look back, confused, not understanding what is happening. A giant serpent with red eyes says that their fight will be its seasoning. The creature's pressure is so intense that Melina screams desperately inside the carriage. One of the mercenaries advances with his axe, but the attack doesn't seem to have any effect. Kettle finally gets tired and tells the serpent to go away, as they are his guests. The snake is surprised and asks why Kettle is outside his tribe's territory. The young man replies that it's none of its business, and the creature tells him not to be ridiculous. The snake unleashes a blast of energy and reveals itself to be the serpent barbarian. The serpent doesn't understand how Kettle dares to give it orders, as it promised immutability. Kettle says he will teach the snake a lesson and prepares for combat. With a single punch, he lands a direct hit on the giant serpent with incredible force. The force of the blow is so great that the creature flies far and slams into the snow. A large sphere of blue energy explodes where the giant serpent fell. The explosion is so strong that the mercenaries can barely stay on their feet. Another even larger energy explosion occurs, showing Kettle's power. The force of the explosion throws Melina aside, and someone desperately shouts her name. We see the serpent on the ground, and Kettle says it's the type that only obeys after being taught a lesson. Melina watches Kettle from a distance, completely shocked by the power he just displayed. The young man warns that he will finish the job there, and that it won't take long to return. He stomps hard on the ground, creating a crater and releasing an incredible purple aura. Then, with impressive speed, he advances toward the giant serpent. His eyes glow with a purple aura as he stares at the snake seriously. His attack results in a blue energy explosion that illuminates all the snow. The butler kneels, terrified, begging for his life, while Melina watches, shocked. Back in the carriage, he says he understands their suspicion and that it's natural not to trust strangers. Suddenly, the carriages begin to float and fly at high speed across the snow. The butler trembles with fear nonstop because of the high-speed journey. The barbarian, on the other hand, remains calm and observes everything with a serious look. The young man then says there is something that has made him curious, surprising the young woman. He asks why she, a noblewoman, decided to embark on such a dangerous journey. The young woman becomes flustered and hesitates to answer the barbarian's question. The young woman explains that she is the first daughter of the concubine of Lord Kasakakasha. She says her mother was used in a political marriage and ended up abandoned. She clenches her fist and reveals that she and her mother are treated like servants in the family. The young woman lowers her head in shame for having revealed so much of her life. The young woman reveals that she volunteered for the mission despite knowing the dangers. With a determined look, she says she did it because someone needed to set an example. The barbarian then smiles and says she is intelligent and has great ambition. The young woman is shocked by his words and calls him greedy. The girl swallows hard, nervous from the intensity of the barbarian's gaze. Suddenly, the carriage stops flying and sways, making a strange noise. The young woman's eyes widen, completely surprised by the stop. The mercenaries look outside, shocked, and the barbarian announces that they have arrived. For the first time in a long time, they see a beautiful, lush green field. The young woman thanks him for his help, and he asks about her return trip. The young woman then calls the barbarian's name to ask him a question. She asks what he meant by calling her intelligent and ambitious. The young man confirms that he said exactly what he meant, leaving them both shocked. He explains that her family is going bankrupt, and even as a concubine's daughter, she is taking action. The barbarian deduces that her goal is to take full control of her family. With a smirk, he then asks if he happens to be wrong. Shocked by the perfect deduction, she admits that he is not wrong. He then says that the story of a concubine's daughter wanting power is a very old one. The girl thinks that the barbarian is very intelligent and not just some fool. She thinks about his power and wonders what would happen if she controlled him. The young woman then asks if he would like to join her on her journey. The young man refuses for now, saying he still has things to resolve there. The young woman then says that in that case, she has another proposal for him. She then offers a beautiful golden brooch as a gift to the barbarian. She asks that if he ever leaves that place, he should look for her family and show them the brooch. With a smile, he says he will gladly accept her gift. The young woman and the butler say their goodbyes, and she prays they will meet again. The barbarian watches the carriage move away along the dirt and snow road. 5 years later, we see the white desert again, covered in snow. An invisible barrier shatters and Kettle can finally leave the place. The system announces that he has completed the mission and can finally leave the desert. The young man walks with determination out of the desert toward the world. With a smile on his face, he thinks that he can finally go to the fantasy world. The barbarian takes a deep breath, smelling the grass and a nearby animal. He is enchanted by the smells of the river and the animals that didn't exist in the desert. With a happy smile, he says that everything is very good and pleasant. The young man then turns and looks at the snowy plain with a look of relief. He says goodbye to that place and shouts that he hopes they never meet again. The barbarian thinks that despite the rough start, he survived the fantasy world. Now he will enjoy everything the world has to offer, like magic and swords. He dreams of finding dragons and elves and living the fantasy to its fullest. The young man thinks that if it weren't for this desire, he would have perished a long time ago. Suddenly, he spots colorful lights shining in the distance in the forest. He realizes it's a place where miracles gather and smiles with excitement. With a smile, he deduces that it must finally be a civilized village. The young man thinks that he tried to talk to the barbarians about shelters, but they didn't understand anything. With his eyes closed, he greatly misses well-structured human villages. He then walks excitedly toward the village and decides to be very kind to everyone there. The forest is beautiful and full of green trees with a magical light in the air. Extending his hand, he prepares to finally interact with civilization. Suddenly, an old elf appears and says that from now on, this will be their home. We then see several happy and smiling elves celebrating their arrival at their new home. The elder elf then tells everyone to unpack their things, and they shout with joy. A young elf approaches the elder, who asks him what his problem is. The young man asks if the place is safe, and the old man confirms that it is, for sure. He is worried because even though it's a remote area, the snow plains are nearby. The elder understands his concern about the monsters, but the young man says it's too close. The old man says it's not a problem, as nothing has come out of there in thousands of years. He explains that a barrier of ancient elven magic protects the place from invaders. Furthermore, the elder reveals that they also have the queen's protection. With a confident smile, he says that no monster can reach their majesty. Meanwhile, Kittle extends his hand and ends up touching the invisible barrier. He feels as if he tore something and wonders what he just touched. The young man ignores the strange sensation and continues walking toward the village excited. Suddenly, he stops and looks to the side, confused as if he heard something. The young man turns and sees a small elf girl hiding behind a tree. The girl has pointed ears in a simple, cute green dress. He is surprised and wonders if she is a real elf. The barbarian approaches to get a closer look at the small creature. He thinks that elves are one of the most iconic races in fantasy worlds. With a goofy smile on his face, he feels happy to be alive at that moment. The little elf girl cries frightened because she is lost and doesn't know where she is. Suddenly, she is startled to hear a strange noise coming from the forest. Her eyes widen in fear as she sees a giant shadow approaching. Kettle appears in front of her with a dark aura and a frightening smile. The girl is paralyzed with fear, and her body trembles uncontrollably from the shock. From the shock, the little elf girl faints in front of the startled barbarian. Birds fly away, startled by the girl's scream before she fainted. The young man holds the fainted elf girl and is unsure what to do with her. He closes his eyes and thinks that she fainted before they even talked. With the girl in his arms, he wonders if he should take her back to the village. He thinks that elves are usually a kind race aligned with good. The barbarian imagines he will be well received if he returns the fainted child. With a smile, he says he is looking forward to seeing the elves' reaction. He then holds the little elf girl carefully and walks toward the village. Suddenly, other elves appear and scream in terror upon seeing a human there. They accuse him and ask how he broke the barrier, and the young man thinks he was not well received. The child's mother screams desperately with a look of pure panic and terror. The elder is shocked because their land was remote and protected by a barrier. Someone warns that the barrier has a crack, and he asks about the queen, who is away. Kettle tries to say he is not an enemy, but an elf threatens his life if he doesn't let her go. The elder thinks that their location has been exposed and that the barrier was made of ancient magic. He concludes that humans came prepared and imagines dark figures hunting him. The young man is speechless and wonders if he really looks like a kidnapper. He then decides that the first thing to do is to clear up this whole misunderstanding. Meanwhile, the little elf girl remains fainted in his arms, looking quite peaceful. Suddenly, the little girl's eyes start to move as she finally wakes up. Her eyes open with a look of shock and great fear upon seeing the stranger. The young man then carefully places her on the ground and tells her to go back to her people. The girl turns and looks back before starting to run toward them. But as she looks back, she sees the dark and giant figure of the barbarian staring at her. Completely terrified, the little one starts crying again with great fear. She runs, screaming to the other elves, and the young man wonders if he is that scary. Kettle is a bit shocked because he thought his appearance was quite good. The barbarian then turns to the elves and tries to explain that he is not their enemy. The elder ignores what he says and shouts that the hostage has finally been freed. Without a second thought, the old elf orders everyone to attack, and they fire their arrows. A shower of arrows flies toward Kettle, who wonders if they can't hear him. The young man realizes that the elves are much more savage than he imagined. He thinks that in legends they are a gentle people who love nature and peace. But nature is a place where only the strong survive, so it's normal for them to be fierce. The arrows hit Kettle but are repelled by an invisible barrier around him. The elf wonders what artifact he is using and orders them to keep attacking without stopping. The barbarian then decides to calm down, and his hand begins to glow with a purple energy. He unleashes an energy shockwave that spreads throughout the forest. His eyes glow with power as he prepares to show his strength. The energy hits the ground hard and creates a crater, kicking up a lot of dust. One of the elves can barely stand, feeling the pressure of the barbarian's aura. Desperate, another elf screams for them to use the protective barrier now. The force of the explosion is so great that it easily uproots the trees. All the elves are thrown into the air by the impact of the energy explosion. A wave of purple energy destroys everything, showing Kettle's absurd power. Even the elder staff trembles with the force of the attack he witnessed. Completely shocked, the old elf wonders what that was that just happened. He is paralyzed with fear, unable to believe the power he just saw. In the midst of the destruction he caused, he stares at the old man and says he is not an enemy. The young man then clasps his hands and thinks that maybe he failed to control his strength. Suddenly, a flaming arrow in the shape of a phoenix flies toward him. The powerful attack grazes the barbarian's face, who doesn't even flinch. The arrow explodes with a tremendous impact, creating a huge fiery explosion. The elves are completely confused and shocked by the sudden attack. From the sky, a long blonde braid can be seen descending gracefully. An elf lands elegantly on a rock, observing the whole situation. The elves bow and call her their majesty with great respect and admiration. She introduces herself as the queen of the Leaf clan and asks what is happening there. The furious elder points and says that a human invaded and attacked them by surprise. The queen then closes her eyes and says with a serious tone that she understands the situation. With a sad look, she laments that this place is also not safe for them. Kettle then raises his hand and asks the queen to wait a moment. He says he would very much like her to hear what he has to say first. The elf is completely surprised by the audacity of the human in front of her. The elder panics and wonders how he escaped her attack unharmed. The queen says that even a powerhouse like him is pursuing them now. With contempt in her eyes, she thinks that humans are truly disgusting. She then prepares another arrow and introduces herself as the queen of the Leaf clan. The queen glares at him with contempt and calls him a human in a very rude way. She then aims her bow with a flaming arrow ready for the attack. With a determined look, she vows to make him pay for his greed. Kettle is confused because they speak the same language, but she doesn't understand him. He then decides that there's nothing to be done and remembers an old lesson. His eyes glow as he thinks that people only listen after being taught a lesson. The queen then fires her arrow, which now glows with a blue energy. Her face shows the determination and power she put into that attack. The arrow flies through the air at high speed, leaving a trail of blue energy. Suddenly, the arrow transforms into a giant dragon of pure blue energy. The barbarian then clenches his fist and prepares to counterattack the dragon. With a purple aura around him, the young man prepares a punch with all his might. He lands a direct punch to the energy dragon's face with absurd power. His blow is so strong that it dispels the energy dragon in an instant. The queen is completely shocked and speechless at what she just saw. The young man then shakes his hand as if he had overdone it a bit with the force. A gigantic explosion happens in the background, destroying the entire nearby forest. The queen then falls to the ground in the middle of the destruction, with no strength to get up. Kettle scratches his head and wonders if he should have held back even more. The elf glares at him from the ground with an expression of pure shock and fear. The queen realizes that he is powerful and above the level of a transcendent. Worried about her people, she orders everyone to flee that place immediately. The other elves are completely shocked and call out for their majesty. She shouts with more force and orders everyone to flee as fast as they can. One of the elves obeys and runs desperately to escape the imminent battle. The elf faces the barbarian and says she acknowledges his strength, but he will not win. The young man feels awkward and thinks that everything went wrong because he just wanted to talk. The queen then closes her eyes and begins to recite a powerful incantation. She summons a being of pure flame that sets the darkness ablaze with its horns. Her eyes open with determination as the diadem on her forehead glows. The elf launches a huge fireball into the sky with all her energy. Suddenly, a giant bull made of flames emerges from within the explosion. Kettle is amazed and says it's a real summon and not an ugly monster. He remembers that the creatures of the tundra were bizarre and mostly very ugly. But this creature in front of him was a bull with horns of bright fire. With a goofy smile, he thinks that this is a spirit from a fantasy world. The queen then orders the fire bull to annihilate the enemy in front of it. The fire spirit grumbles that contracts aren't worth it and are a nuisance. Annoyed by the complaint, the elf simply tells it to be silent. She thinks that the stronger the spirit, the greater its pride, and she can barely summon it. The queen says she got the contract from another tribe and tells it to fulfill the agreement. The fire bull then turns and asks if it just needs to finish off the human in front of it. However, upon closer inspection, the fire spirit notices something very strange about the young man. With a frightening smile, the barbarian stares at the creature, which wonders if he is human. The fire bull then composes itself and assumes an imposing posture, surrounded by flames. Kettle gets very excited by the scene and thinks that this is the fantasy he dreamed of. But he soon remembers that the elves see him as an invader of their lands. The spirit says that humans are pathetic and that it has decided to turn him to ash. The barbarian still doesn't understand anything and just stares at the creature with a confused face. The fireball's eyes glow with a red energy, preparing to attack. The creature then stumps its hoof on the ground forcefully and prepares to charge. Without wasting time, the bull runs at high speed toward the young man to attack him. The gray-haired man doesn't even move and just waits for the impact of the attack calmly. A huge fiery explosion occurs, kicking up dust and rocks everywhere. The elf queen can barely shield herself from the shockwave caused by the explosion. Suddenly, she realizes something is wrong and is shocked to see what really happened. Kettle simply stopped the attack by holding the bull's horn with just one hand. The young man lifts the creature into the air with ease, leaving the spirit shocked. With a smile, he says that the spirit's beast form makes him feel much more at ease, because that way, it's much easier to finish it off without needing to hold back at all. The elf queen is completely speechless at what she has just witnessed. The barbarian then throws the fire bull with all his might, causing a tremendous impact. A bright flash of light illuminates everything, showing the power of the collision. The explosion cuts a path of destruction through the forest, annihilating everything. The force is so immense that, in an exaggerated scene, an explosion is seen from space. On the ground, a huge fiery explosion completely destroys the landscape. The queen is thrown backward by the shockwave and screams desperately. Amidst the chaos, Kettle remains standing, his purple eyes glowing with power. On her knees, the elf looks around and wonders what happened there. She sees a giant crater and can't believe that it's real. The young man then stares at her from atop a rock in complete silence. Defeated, the elf queen bows her head and begins to plead for mercy. She asks him to please spare the lives of her people, who are innocent. The gray-haired man then repeats once more that he is not her enemy. The queen raises her head and stares at him, completely shocked by his words. Sitting on the ground, she is speechless and asks what he means by that. After a long conversation, they finally manage to understand each other. The elf realizes that he really wasn't an enemy and is very surprised. Ashamed, she apologizes and says they judged him too quickly. Her conscience weighs on her as she remembers attacking the one who saved a child. With a smile, the young man says it's all right because he understands their situation. Suspicious, the queen asks if he isn't one of the humans who are persecuting them. The young man explains that it's the first time he's seen an elf, as they don't exist in the White Desert. The elf is shocked to hear the name White Desert and stares at him in surprise. He then reveals that outsiders call him the Gray Barbarian of the Desert. The queen says it's impossible, as she didn't think humans could survive there. She then asks if it means that others can also leave that place. The barbarian replies that he doesn't know but highly doubts anyone else can get out. He explains that the desert has strict rules that not even powerful serpents challenge. However, for some reason, he managed to bypass the rules with a secret mission. The gray-haired man concludes by saying it was a very rare exception. Relieved, the queen then asks if her summon is okay after everything. Awkwardly, the young man remembers that he ended up splitting the fire bowl in half. The elf explains that it's no problem, as spirits return to their realm. The queen admits she was rude and offers to do whatever he wants. Kettle becomes thoughtful and repeats the word spirit to himself. He then asks if beings other than elves can also make contracts with spirits. With a serious expression, the queen replies that it might not be possible. She explains that some humans with an affinity for nature can make contracts, but she concludes that it would be impossible for the barbarian to have this affinity. The queen says that if he wants a contract with a spirit, he needs to go to Holy Elf. The elf explains that it is the sacred land where their god lives, and it might be possible there. Excited, the young man asks if a human like him would be allowed to enter the sacred land. The elf replies no, but with her introduction, it might be possible to go there. Enveloped in flames, she says that Holy Elf is the dream destination of every researcher. The elf says it's dangerous to let a human near, and no elf would reveal the location. The queen then creates a small, glowing red crystal in her hand. Saying she wants to believe in him, the elf offers the crystal she just created. The young man then takes the object and thanks the queen for her trust. She warns him that even if he gets close, the god of the elves may still test him. With a smile, she says she thinks he will pass and wishes him good luck. She then introduces herself as Mercelia and asks for the barbarian's name. With a smile on his face, he replies that his name is Kettle the Barbarian. The young man then stumps hard on the ground, preparing to set off on his journey. With a powerful leap, he flies at high speed, leaving a trail behind him. His purple aura envelopes him as he runs at high speed through the forest. The barbarian then disappears into the middle of the forest in the blink of an eye. We then see the young man traveling through the skies like a comet of pure energy. At the border of the kingdom of Jihint, a guard is startled by something approaching. The head of the guard panics and orders the bell to be rung and everyone else to be called. Kettle then lands hard in front of the kingdom's wall, kicking up a lot of dust. His feet touch the ground firmly, showing that the long journey hasn't tired him one bit. When the dust settles, a muscular and imposing figure emerges, facing the soldiers. The guards are completely terrified by the presence of this mysterious man. With a smile, the young man asks if they are the guards and says it's a pleasure to meet them. The three soldiers get into a defensive stance, not knowing how to react to the situation. Their leader then asks if the thunderous noise from before was caused by him. The young man just stares at him with a confused expression, not quite understanding the question. Suddenly, the guard notices his gray hair and the scar on his chest and is shocked. He then remembers the famous and fearsome legend of the Gray Barbarian of the Desert. The figure of the man in front of him perfectly matches the legend's description. Terrified, the guards tell him to stop and threaten to attack if he gets any closer. The young man asks them to calm down and assures them once again that he is not an enemy. Suspicious, the head of the guard asks what on earth he is looking for in their territory. The gray-haired man then points with his finger in a specific direction. His finger is pointed directly at the Great Wall that protects the kingdom. The soldier is confused and looks at the wall, not understanding what he means. The barbarian then reveals that he would very much like to pay a visit to their territory. The head of the guard is completely speechless at such an unexpected request. The other soldiers also have a blank look on their faces, not understanding the situation at all. Inside a room, the barbarian explains that he would like to stay there for a while. The soldier then asks what his name is, and the young man replies that his name is Kettle. Suspicious, the guard asks if he has any documents or how he can identify himself. Suddenly, the gray-haired man remembers something that might help him in this situation. In a flashback, he recalls the young noblewoman who gave him a brooch as a gift. The young woman asked him to show the object to her family if he ever left the desert. The young man then places the brooch on the table and asks if that serves as identification. The soldier is completely surprised and asks what that shiny object is. The barbarian says it's the crest of House Akasha, and the guard recognizes the name immediately. The soldier explains that the house became famous, and the young man asks if the brooch can be used. The guard says it doesn't look fake, but it's hard to confirm since it's from another kingdom. Even so, he states that it is useful and allows him to enter, but with a small condition. The gray-haired man becomes curious and wonders what the guard's condition might be. The soldier explains that they need to be sure the young man is not a threat to them. The condition is to clear a dungeon with 3 other suspects who also want to enter. The young man finds the condition much easier than he expected and thinks about it for a bit. With a smile, he accepts the proposal, but the guard still has one more condition for him. After clearing the dungeon, he will have to report everything that happened inside to the guard. The barbarian understands the plan to make the suspects watch each other and finds it quite clever. The soldier becomes awkward and asks suspiciously if he is really a barbarian. With a confident smile, the young man confirms that he is indeed a barbarian. The soldier thinks that he thought barbarians were just a race of ignorant brutes. The head of the guard then composes himself and decides to end the conversation there. A bearded man grumbles that going into a dungeon with thieves is tragic. This is Alessandro, a self-proclaimed paladin who seems very annoyed with the situation. A young thief provokes him and asks why he is starting another fight. The paladin gets angry and says that a little thief like him shouldn't insult him. The thief laughs and says that a real paladin wouldn't even be in this filthy place. The young man provokes him, saying he is just a wandering warrior like him. The paladin becomes furious and grips his sword tightly at the provocation. The older man draws his sword and has a look of pure rage on his face. With a sarcastic smile, the thief asks if he wants to fight right there. The young man readies his poisoned dagger and says the old armor won't protect him. The paladin also prepares for combat and his sword glows with energy. Suddenly, a voice asks the two of them to stop fighting immediately. A nun places herself between the two and sighs warily at the pointless fight. She wonders if everything will be alright invading a dungeon with those 2 brawlers. The nun remembers that the minimum number for a dungeon is 4, and they are 1 short. Worried, the young woman wonders who the last member of their group will be. Suddenly, she hears the door opening and turns to see who has arrived. The guard announces that the last person has arrived, and the thief hopes he is sane. Right after, a foot with a fur boot enters the room, drawing attention. When the figure enters, Kittle appears, his purple eyes glowing intimidatingly. Everyone in the room falls silent and looks at the muscular man who just arrived. With a smile on his face, he then asks if they're his new group mates. The paladin is shocked and comments to himself about how huge the newcomer is. The nun blushes and wonders if he is really a human. The thief also feels the pressure of the man's powerful aura, and his eyes go white. The gray-haired young man then greets them with a smile, saying it's a pleasure to meet them. The head of the guard then announces that he will leave them alone to talk for a bit. Kettle decides to start the introductions and says he is a barbarian named Kettle. He then points to the thief, who stutters and introduces himself as Kasan the thief. Next, the paladin introduces himself as Alessandro, and the barbarian asks if he uses holy power. The older man awkwardly replies that because he's special, he can't use his power. The nun then says her name is Hayes, and she serves the god of lies and deceit. The barbarian is surprised and asks if her identity is also uncertain like his. The young woman explains that because of her god, she is not well regarded by people. After introducing themselves, the group lines up, ready for the dungeon mission. The guard returns and, seeing that everyone is ready, tells them to leave for the mission. With a serious expression, the barbarian prepares to finally enter the dungeon. The nun holds her necklace with a serious expression while the thief observes her from the side. The guard then informs everyone that they have finally reached their destination. Kettle looks at the dungeon entrance with an expression of pure curiosity. In front of a cave, the group faces the entrance of the dungeon they must clear. The guard explains that the dungeon has 3 floors and the monsters are undead. He orders them to clear the place and return with proof to be able to enter the kingdom. The thief then asks for the plan to begin the dungeon raid. Kettle pats the thief on the back and says they are a team, no need for formalities. The thief feels awkward about the situation and thinks for a bit about how to organize the group. He then says that Kettle and the paladin will be in the front, and he will check for traps. The young man continues the plan and says the nun will provide support from the rear with her skills. With a smile, Kettle agrees and the thief scratches his head, looking a bit awkward. The barbarian then says it's time to go in, and everyone prepares for the mission. The group enters the dark dungeon with the barbarian leading the way. To everyone's surprise, the inside of the dungeon is completely covered in ice. The nun complains that it's all dark and she can't even see the traps. The thief comments that the place seems too normal, which makes him very suspicious. Suddenly, the masked young man notices something strange in the darkness of the cave. He stops Kettle and warns him that there are monsters, but the barbarian can't see anything. The thief points to bones on the ground and warns that they are skeletons that will rise. Annoyed, the thief thinks the dungeon is a trap to get rid of them. Kettle repeats the word skeletons while thinking about the situation in the cave. The masked young man explains that the skeletons are strong and keep moving even when injured. A skeleton emerges, and the thief says that because they are made of bone, their defense is very strong. The creature stands up, and he realizes the dungeon is tougher than he thought. The thief then tells the nun and the paladin to prepare for the coming combat. He explains that the weak spot is the neck, and Kettle mentally praises him as a good leader. The barbarian then agrees with the plan and prepares to take action in the battle. Suddenly, the bones on the ground begin to come together, and a skeleton reconstructs itself. The gray-haired man is surprised to see the skeleton assembling itself. The monster then picks up a pickaxe from the ground and prepares to attack the group. The paladin holds his shield tightly and faces the creature with a nervous look. The nun closes her eyes and begins to recite an incantation with a golden aura. The thief draws his dagger and also prepares for combat against the skeleton. The barbarian, however, just prepares to punch the approaching monster. The skeleton advances and tries to hit Kettle with a powerful blow from its pickaxe. Without any difficulty, the young man lands a direct punch that destroys the monster. He then stops with his hand extended after defeating the creature with a single blow. A piece of the skeleton's weapon falls on the ice floor, shattering on impact. The paladin is completely shocked by the absurd strength he just witnessed. The thief and the nun are completely speechless, their eyes white with pure shock. A sly smile forms on the barbarian's face, who seems very satisfied with the result. He then says the thief was right, and that the monster stops moving without its head. Awkwardly, the masked young man laughs and says that's not quite what he meant. A narration explains that skeleton bones are tough, and this one was strengthened by the dungeon. The only way to defeat one is to repeatedly attack its neck to sever the vertebrae. But shattering its skull with a single blow, as he did, is considered completely impossible. The thief thinks that he knew Kettle was strong, but he never imagined it was this much. Everyone looks at the dust of bones and wonders if he is even a human being. The gray-haired man then steps on the bone dust, crushing what was left of the monster. With a confident smile on his face, he tells the group that they should keep moving. Desperately, everyone runs and the nun shouts highs, leaving Kettle very confused. In a comical panel, he thinks they don't need to rush, but the others fear for their lives. The young man then turns to them with a confused expression, not understanding the group's reaction. Suddenly, he stops and observes a skull that had fallen on the ice cave floor. Seeing that he stopped, the thief calls his name, not understanding what is happening. In front of them, the group sees a pile of several skeletons wearing red robes. Frightened, the nun stutters the word skeletons while staring at the monsters on the ground. The thief clenches his fist and prepares for another battle against the undead. The paladin warns that they are coming and then decides to ask Kettle for a favor. The three are completely speechless at the older man's unexpected request. Kettle says he will take care of the skeletons himself, and the group agrees immediately. With a smirk, the young man thanks them, and his eyes glow with a purple aura. He then walks toward one of the skeletons, which stands up with a sword. The group watches from a distance and wonders what on earth he is planning to do. With a smile, the young man finds the creature fascinating and wonders how it assembles itself. The bone monster then advances and tries to hit Kettle with a sword strike. However, the barbarian blocks the blow with his hand, creating a wave of purple energy. Holding the blade, he asks the monster what it's going to do now. The skeleton then readies its sword and prepares for a new powerful attack. A bluish energy glows, indicating a quick and powerful movement. But the gray-haired man stands up and stops the creature's blow again. He looks surprised as he feels the force of the skeleton's attack. With just one hand, the barbarian holds the monster's sword without any difficulty. With a smile on his face, he asks the creature what it thinks of this. The young man then squeezes the monster's hand tightly, breaking it into little pieces. He reveals a shiny crystal that was inside the bone creature's hand. The skeleton is completely confused, not understanding what just happened. Suddenly, the monster's eyes glow with an intense, murderous rage. Without its sword, the creature attempts a last desperate attack against the barbarian. The monster then grabs another sword and attacks the barbarian with a powerful and swift blow. With a smile, the young man comments that the creature is clever and knows how to switch hands. The bone creature lunges to attack, but the barbarian stops the blow once more. Without much effort, the young man breaks the monster's other hand with a purple aura. He then throws the skeleton's body away, which shatters on the ice floor. The creature's legs break off on impact and fall inertly on the cave floor. Even without a body, the monster continues to advance toward him with a single arm. Kettle prepares for the attack and faces the creature with a serious, focused look. The young man is impressed and says the monster is intelligent because it replaces parts. The nun is disgusted by the scene and covers her mouth with her hand, horrified by the sight. The paladin and the thief also tremble with fear at the bizarre scene in front of them. With a look of dread, the older man calls him a true barbarian. The thief's eyes go white with fear as he sees Kettle smiling at the monster. The young man then rips off the skeleton's head and holds it in his hands with a smile. With his purple eyes glowing, he stares at the skull that is still moving in his hand. He notices that the monster can only move its head and finds the situation amusing. Smiling, the barbarian apologizes for the delay and casually wipes his hands. The thief tells him to take all the time he needs with an expression of pure fear. The gray-haired man then steps on the snow and prepares to continue the journey. With a smile, he tells them to keep going, and the terrified group agrees. The gray-haired man stops walking, and the group follows him closely. The group finally reaches the second floor of the dark and icy dungeon. The paladin and the barbarian face the new floor with very serious expressions. The nun also holds her amulet tightly, seeming a bit nervous. The thief, on the other hand, seems exhausted and sighs wearily from the journey. He then suggests that maybe it would be better for them to take a short break to rest. The barbarian thinks for a moment and agrees that it would be better for everyone there. With a cry of relief, the thief thanks the barbarian for his understanding. The gray-haired man then closes his eyes and seems to relax a bit as well. As the frightened group rests, Kittle stares at them in complete silence. He then says he has a question about the dungeon, and the nun is surprised. Ashamed, the young man reveals that his knowledge on the subject is insufficient. The young woman says that the desire to learn is a virtue and offers to help. The nun then asks what he is curious to know more about. He mentions that the dungeon is very close to the territory where people live. The young man asks if there are any problems with the dungeon and the monsters inside. The young woman explains that usually the monsters don't leave, but there are exceptions. The thief then clears his throat to also add an explanation. He says that dungeons are a natural phenomenon and sometimes look like caves. Other times they are towers and most appear near highly populated areas. The gray-haired young man understands why there is a dungeon in that place. The nun explains that when one appears, the local lord assesses the danger and sends someone. The young man gives a sly smile upon hearing her explanation about the dungeon. He then asks if they don't manifest inside the territory, and the group confirms. With a goofy smile on his face, he asks if there is a reward for clearing the place. The young woman confirms and says that there is usually a boss on the last floor with a treasure. With a wicked smile, the barbarian thinks that it's exactly like a game he used to play. The nun asks confusedly what game that is, and he says he was thinking out loud. Kettle reveals that he has one more curiosity, and the nun tells him to ask. He asks who creates the dungeons, and the young woman is completely confused. She explains that dungeons occur naturally, and no one really creates them. The young man then says that there are many strange things for it to be just a natural phenomenon. With a serious look, he comments that it seems too deliberate to be natural. The nun nods in agreement and starts thinking about what he just said. She thinks it was something so common that she never even questioned it before. The thief had also never thought about it, as it was an absolute truth of the world. He remembers that barbarians are considered an ignorant and very savage people. A flashback shows the cruelty of barbarians who feel no pity for anyone. The masked young man then wonders if Kettle is really a barbarian. With an intrigued look, the thief finds the whole situation very interesting. With a smile, Kettle asks the group if they have rested enough. Surprised by the question, the group awkwardly agrees that they have rested. The gray-haired man then says it's time to continue, and the thief agrees excitedly. With a serious expression, everyone prepares to continue exploring the dungeon. Leading the way, the barbarian and his new companions advance through the dark cave. Suddenly, the gray-haired man stops walking with a confused expression on his face. He then spots a treasure chest in the middle of the path and asks what that is. The thief explains that it's a treasure chest, that Kettle can have it if he can open it. The young man thinks that a real thief would open it, but he decides to leave it, and Kettle calls him. The thief is completely speechless with a blank look on his face, not understanding the request. The gray-haired man then points to the chest and repeats that it's a treasure. He then says that the young man is a thief, and Kassan agrees awkwardly. Excited, the barbarian asks if it's not a thief's job to open chests like that one. The masked young man thinks that the barbarian is not wrong, but there is a small problem. He thinks that if he knew how to open chests, he wouldn't be in this complicated situation. Desperately, he shouts that a novice thief like him doesn't know how to pick locks. Even so, he thinks he can't just tell the barbarian the truth. Looking at Kettle's excited face, he fears the truth will disappoint him. He imagines the barbarian calling him useless for not knowing how to do his job properly. The simple idea of being called useless leaves the poor thief completely terrified. With few options, the thief laughs awkwardly and says he will try to open the chest. Kettle watches him with curiosity while the young man thinks he won't get out alive if he fails. Desperate, he tries to remember the skills he saw other thieves use in the past. He concentrates with all his might and thinks he will have to risk his life to succeed. Suddenly, a clicking sound is heard, and the thief is shocked, not understanding. The barbarian is also very surprised by the noise and stares at the young man, confused. With tears of joy streaming down his face, he announces that the chest is open. The nun gets very excited and says he is amazing for managing to open it. The barbarian is also impressed and praises him, leaving Kassan a bit awkward. The thief, who always prided himself on doing his best, now questions his past. The nun explains that the treasure is enough for a family to live well for a month. With a smile on his face, Kettle says he understands and seems very satisfied with the answer. The gray-haired man then tells the masked young man to take care of all the treasure. Kassan then takes a silver chalice from the chest and observes it, paying attention to the details. The barbarian calls his name again, and the young man continues to look at the treasure from the chest. Suddenly, the thief lets out a scream of terror that echoes throughout the ice cave. Kettle asks if he needs help, but the young man desperately denies what he did. The gray-haired man remains still, not understanding the thief's strange reaction. The thief hides behind the barbarian in fear while the group watches the scene. He then asks them to stop because a giant skeleton is lying on the ground in front of them. The masked young man says there are 4 skeletons and that he will take care of 3 of them. The rest of the group is completely shocked by the older man's confidence. With his purple eyes glowing, the barbarian tells them to take care of the last monster. The thief is speechless at the request and nods, looking very tense. The paladin and the nun also nod, not knowing what to say. Without wasting time, the gray-haired man advances toward the skeletons on the ground. Suddenly, the eyes of one of the monsters glow with a very sinister blue light. The thief comments that seeing the bones come together like that gives him the creeps. Slowly, the skeletons begin to rise from the ground to attack the group once and for all. The 4 creatures then stand up and the barbarian gets everyone's attention. The paladin prepares for battle and a golden aura envelopes his entire body. The nun also closes her eyes and prays while a golden light completely envelopes her. With the group ready to fight, the thief shouts that the battle is finally about to begin. Without hesitation, the masked young man runs toward one of the skeletons to attack. He then delivers a powerful blow with his dagger, glowing golden, at the monster. The bone creature seems surprised by the sudden and swift attack from the thief. Suddenly, another skeleton grabs the barbarian by the collar with surprising strength. He tells the group not to interrupt because he wants to take care of all the monsters himself. One of the skeletons then raises its bony arm to attack the gray-haired man. Meanwhile, the paladin blocks the blow of another creature with his metal shield. The golden aura around the paladin shines even brighter with the impact of the blow. The thief leaps into the air and prepares an aerial attack with his shining daggers. He lands a direct hit on the skeleton with a quick and precise blow to its neck. The nun then casts a spell called Shadow of Confusion on one of the monsters. The paladin also uses a skill and launches a fireball toward the creature. The attack hits the skeleton squarely and sends it flying with a large explosion. The bone creature's legs break from the impact of the powerful blow. The monster turns to the paladin with an expression of pure rage on its face. With a smile, the creature advances toward him for a retaliatory attack. Kettle laughs and seems quite amused by the battle happening in front of him. He praises the group's skills and says it's impressive to see them in action. The gray-haired young man comments that it's a very rare scene to see in person. He then clenches his fist and a purple aura envelopes him, preparing to fight as well. With a smile, he says that now that the obstacles are gone, it's time to enjoy the show. The thief lands another powerful blow on the skeleton with his glowing dagger. Suddenly, he notices something and thinks that for some reason, that barbarian is strange. The nun and the paladin realize at the same time that the barbarian is testing them. One of the skeletons stares at the thief with its blue eyes glowing in the darkness. The bone creature sits on the ground with a confused expression on its face. The nun thinks that if they show weakness in this battle, they will all perish. With their eyes glowing with fury, the paladin and the thief fight together against the skeleton. After a direct hit, the bone creature's head falls and dissolves into blue particles. The battle was so intense that the older man kneels on the ground, completely exhausted. Visibly tired, everyone is on the ground, breathless after that difficult combat. Kettle then reflects that the warriors he met in the snow were strong and seemed satisfied. Arriving on the 3rd floor, they face an even larger number of skeletons. Even with more enemies, Kettle leads the advance, and they proceed without much difficulty. The nun and the rest of the group face the new challenge with very serious expressions. The thief observes the barbarian in front of him as they finally reach the last floor. In the deepest part of the dungeon, they find the boss sitting on an imposing throne. The group then positions themselves to face the dungeon master, who awaits them on his throne. Terrified, the young woman recognizes him as a skeleton knight and trembles, not understanding why he is there. The young man asks if the monster is different, and the nun confirms that he is much stronger. She explains that they have no chance and asks what happens if they decide to retreat now. The barbarian says that if the decision is reasonable, the territory will likely process it without issues. A smirk then forms on the young man's face, who seems very calm about the situation. Kettle then says that her reasoning is quite reasonable, leaving everyone even more confused. Suddenly, the knight's armor begins to glow with a very powerful purple energy. The skeleton knight then rises from his throne, his red eyes glowing with anger. The creature descends the stairs with its sword and prepares for the final battle against the group. The barbarian finds it interesting that a skeleton maintains its form and stares at it with a curious look. The skeleton knight positions itself for battle with its sword, and a purple aura envelopes it. Terrified, the nun's eyes widen in complete panic at the monster's presence. The monster then leaps and launches a powerful attack, but the group creates a golden shield. The purple attack collides with the golden shield, generating a tremendous energy impact. The young woman struggles to keep the shield up and groans from the force of the enemy's blow. The force of the attack is so great that the golden shield shatters into 1,000 pieces. With the shield broken, the paladin is thrown backward, screaming in pain from the impact. The older man falls to the ground with his shield smoking, and the nun covers her face. Kettle observes the scene with a surprised expression on his face but doesn't seem worried. Shocked, the paladin gasps for breath and wonders how a single blow has so much power. The monster stares at the group from a distance, and the older man thinks it is too strong. The skeleton knight's eyes glow with a purple energy, preparing to attack. The creature then advances at high speed toward them for a second attack. The barbarian faces the monster with a serious expression, ready to finally intervene. His eyes focus on the enemy as he prepares for the imminent combat. Kettle then advances and lands a powerful punch squarely on the skeleton knight. His blow shatters the monster's armor and throws it backward with incredible force. The rest of the group is completely shocked and speechless at the scene they just saw. The gray-haired man then cracks his knuckles, looking very satisfied with the result. With a smile on his face, the barbarian asks if that was all the boss could do. The rest of the group remains in shock, unable to react to what they just saw. Suddenly, the gray-haired man turns and calls out the name of the group's thief. Awkwardly and stuttering, the masked young man responds, not understanding what he wants. We then see the large, shiny treasure chest in the middle of the dungeon master's room. Desperate, the thief shouts that it's impossible because he doesn't have the necessary skill to open it. The young man says it's a shame, but they will have to leave the treasure behind and go. Unexpectedly, the barbarian advances with his purple eyes glowing toward the chest. The thief's eyes widen, completely in shock at his action. Kettle then appears in front of the broken and frozen chest from his powerful punch. The paladin and the nun scream in terror, their eyes white with complete fright. Kettle says the reward is better this way and tells Kassan to take care of the rest of the treasure. The older man thinks it's unbelievable that he shattered the chest with a single punch. Confused, Kassan wonders why the barbarian asked him to open it if he could just break it. Suddenly, the cave begins to glow, and they spot the exit of the dark dungeon. Once outside, the group watches the dungeon entrance collapse in front of them. The gray-haired man stares at the scene and asks the group what is happening. The cave collapses completely and throws the group backward with a large explosion. The thief explains that the dungeon disappears if it's cleared and Layman's not having a secret room. Surprised, the barbarian asks if there are secret rooms, and Kassan confirms that there are. With a smirk, the barbarian says that the idea of secret rooms sounds very fun. The thief is confused and speechless at the barbarian's calmness about the rooms. Back at the kingdom, the guard is shocked that they returned so quickly. The head of the guard clears his throat and composes himself to question them about the mission. He then asks how their experience was inside the dungeon he indicated. With a thumbs up, the barbarian replies that it was very satisfying, and the guard is surprised. The head of the guard tells them to follow him one by one for the entry procedure. The nun comments that there doesn't seem to have been any serious problem with the barbarian. The guard then asks if it's acceptable for Kettle to stay in their domain for a while. The young woman thinks that he answers vaguely when the subject is about the barbarian. The head of the guard thinks that the test is not just to clear the dungeon but to eliminate strangers. The thief says that Kettle doesn't seem like the type to cause trouble and smiles awkwardly. The guard thinks that even though Kettle is strong, he didn't harm the group and is different. The young man praises Kassan as a good thief and says that Alessandro was a great warrior. The head of the guard finds it strange because when he forces strangers into a group, they hate each other. The man then falls silent for a moment, thinking about the whole situation. He finally decides that he will allow the barbarian to enter their territory. The guard warns him that if he causes trouble, he will be exiled, and the group nods in agreement. He then hands over a bag of coins and tells them to divide the reward. With a smile, the barbarian takes the bag and says they will split the money equally. Completely terrified, the group refuses the offer and says it's fine with them. The barbarian says they are a team and the reward should be divided equally. Excited, Kettle suggests they go out for a drink to celebrate the mission victory. With no choice, the group agrees to the idea of celebrating with him, laughing awkwardly. Crying rivers of tears, the three of them beg the barbarian to let them go. The guard observes the scene and thinks about the barbarian who defeated a skeleton knight. He thinks that Kettle is monstrously strong and not just any barbarian at all. The head of the guard then remembers the legend of the barbarian, an otherworldly existence. The man then turns and decides he needs to report what happened to the Lord. He informs his men that he is going to see the Lord and leaves them on guard at the kingdom gate. We then see the large and luxurious castle where the Lord of the domain currently lives. Inside a room, someone writes on a scroll with a quill and a candlestick. Sitting on his throne, the Lord tells the guard to enter his chambers to talk. The head of the guard enters the room and prepares to give his report to the Lord. This is Luke Barkin, the Lord of the domain, and he asks the guard what the matter is. The captain then introduces himself and says that a barbarian has appeared in their domain. The camera focuses on the exterior of the Lord's grand castle during the starry night. We then see a luxurious and well-decorated hallway with a long red carpet. From inside a room, the Lord asks if the guard gave him permission to enter. Nervous, the head of the guard replies that he judged it wouldn't be a big problem. The Lord then asks what the problem is, since he himself allowed the entry. The guard replies that the barbarian is strong enough to be a big problem. With a serious expression, the bearded man asks how strong he really is. The captain reveals that the young man defeated a skeleton knight with a single blow. Shocked, the Lord's eyes widen and he repeats the words skeleton knight. He thinks that such a monster can only be faced by someone of knight level. The Lord remembers that barbarians are ignorant beings who only solve everything with force. He then asks if the guard is saying that the young man is a first-class warrior. The captain replies that the probability of him being first-class is very high. And he adds that he cannot deny the possibility of him being even stronger. The Lord thinks that such a strong barbarian warrior will be a headache. The captain then asks if summoning the young man is really a good idea. The bearded man says he wants to see him with his own eyes because he could be dangerous. He then reveals that it's no problem because his personal knight is with him. The captain is surprised and a little relieved by the Lord's revelation. The Lord then asks his knight what he thinks of this whole situation. The knight replies that the barbarian is just a brute with no intelligence. With pride, he says that his swordsmanship is superior and that the barbarian is nothing. The bearded man nods in agreement, seeming to reflect on his words. He then orders the barbarian to be summoned, as he will speak with him personally. In a tavern, the group celebrates with a feast full of food and drink. The barbarian eats with gusto and seems to be having a great time with the food. He picks up a bone and starts gnawing on it with his sharp teeth and a fierce expression. The group sits down to eat and drink together, but the tension is still in the air. The paladin and the others have a scared look on their faces while Kettle enjoys the food. The gray-haired man slams his mug on the table, spilling some of his drink. He says the food is delicious and the place is peaceful, so he's paying for everything. The nun and the paladin laugh awkwardly at the barbarian's offer to pay the bill. Kettle then asks if the paladin is really a holy knight, and he confirms it. The young man asks what divine power he uses, since he didn't see anything in the dungeon. Awkwardly, the older man says he's still training and his power hasn't awakened. Kettle thinks it's a shame, and the paladin clears his throat to quickly change the subject. The barbarian then asks the nun if there's a temple for her god nearby. The young woman replies that there probably isn't, as her goddess isn't very welcome. She reveals that her god is Kalosia, the god of lies and deceit, which is why he's avoided. The nun then curiously asks Kettle how strong he really is. The thief and the paladin are surprised and shocked by the young woman's question. Eating a snack, Kettle is confused by the nun's sudden question. The gray-haired young man says he's also curious since it hasn't been long since he left the snow. The young woman explains that a first-class warrior could probably defeat him. The gray-haired young man says that would make him a second-rate warrior, and the young woman is surprised. The tavern owner appears, trembling, and announces it's closing time, afraid of the barbarian. With a smile on his face, Kettle apologizes and says they're already on their way out of the tavern. Leaving the tavern, the young man asks the group if they have any plans for the rest of the night. The nun and the paladin desperately shout that yes, they have many plans and can't stay any longer. The thief also shouts with a terrified look on his face that he's extremely busy at the moment. With a gentle smile, the barbarian says it's a shame and says goodbye to them for now. In a comical panel, the group happily says goodbye and prays they never meet him again. Now in a room, the young man steps on a soft pillow, looking very relieved and happy. Lying in bed, he sighs with relief and wonders if this is the first time he's slept like this since he arrived. He thinks it's a relief to be able to afford a room thanks to the reward from the dungeon he cleared. Relaxing in bed, he thinks that compared to the snow, this place is a true paradise. He remembers it took a long time to reach civilization and wonders what to do now. With his hand outstretched, he decides he wants an adventure and thinks about the sacred lands of the elves. His eyes sparkle as he thinks about visiting the magic tower and the kingdom's capital. Suddenly, he hears a knock on the door, interrupting his thoughts about the future. Someone is knocking on his door, and the sound echoes through the very quiet room. Sleepy and drooling, the young man wakes up confused, not understanding who it could be at this hour. The young man sits up in bed and wipes his mouth, composing himself to answer whoever it is. When he opens the door, he finds a guard who apologizes for waking him. The young man opens the door and asks the guard what he wants at this time of night. The guard seems a little nervous and musters the courage to deliver the message to the barbarian. With a serious expression, he reveals that the lord of the territory wishes to see him in person. The young man repeats the word "lord" and thinks that the master of the land wants to meet him. With an excited and innocent smile on his face, the barbarian agrees to meet the lord. He then turns to get his clothes, and the guard wonders if he found the right guy. The next day, we see a beautiful square with a fountain in the center of the city. He thinks that he only saw the place at night and didn't have time to look at everything calmly. Now seeing everything during the day, the gray-haired young man finds the place quite interesting. A smile forms on his face as he watches the city life with admiration. With a thumbs up, he says he likes this fantasy world, making the guard feel awkward. The soldier thinks he doesn't have much time and needs to block his view as much as possible. Arriving at the castle, the guard announces to the lord that he has brought the barbarian as requested. The bearded man then turns and tells the gray-haired young man to enter the room. The barbarian and the guard enter the throne room, walking on the large red carpet. The bearded man extends his hand and says it's a pleasure to meet the famous barbarian. He then formally introduces himself as Luke Barkin, the lord of this territory. The young man shakes his hand and says it's a pleasure to meet the rightful lord of the land. With a serious look, the gray-haired young man introduces himself as Kettle the barbarian. The lord is visibly surprised by the strength of the muscular man's handshake. The lord's eyes widen, and he starts to break into a cold sweat from the young man's strength. Looking at the handshake, he's shocked to see the barbarian is bowing his head. He thinks that barbarians don't bow because strength is everything to them, and reflects that he's seen it all. The bearded man composes himself and says Kettle has learned good manners, inviting him to sit. Sitting in a chair, the young man faces the lord on his throne with a knight by his side. The lord's room is extremely luxurious with several paintings and very fancy decor. The gray-haired young man looks around and thinks this is what a lord's castle looks like. His eyes widen as he thinks that even in a fantasy world, the castles are medieval. Suddenly, he spots the knight in armor next to the lord and gets very curious. Excited, he thinks that he used to play knight games and that seeing a real one is very cool. The knight, however, senses a strange aura and glares at the barbarian with an angry look. A red aura of hostility envelops the knight, who becomes furious with the young man. He thinks it's hostile intent and wonders how he dares in front of the Lord. We then see a dark silhouette of the barbarian with his purple eyes glowing with power. The knight then grips his sword and vows that the fool won't be leaving that place. The Lord ignores the tension and says the reason he called him there is quite simple. With a serious look, the bearded man reveals there are a few things he wants to check. The young man then replies that he will do as he wishes and asks what he wants to know. The Lord asks the first question and wants to know where the barbarian really came from. Kettle says that's an important question and reveals he came from the coldest place in the world. He continues, saying he came from a world completely covered in snow and white. The Lord and his knight are shocked as they realize he's talking about the White Desert. The bearded man thinks that the barbarian of legend is right in front of him at that moment. With a serious look, the Lord says it's very hard to believe what he's saying. The young man says the place was horrible, and whether to believe it or not is the Lord's choice. The bearded man then changes the subject and decides to ask him a different question. Sitting on his throne, he directly asks the barbarian how strong he really is. The Lord thinks the most important thing is to know how dangerous his power can be. Kettle says the question is wrong, because he doesn't know the strength levels of this place. The Lord then narrows his eyes, seeming to think of a new strategy for the conversation. Next to the Lord, the knight also stares at the barbarian with a suspicious expression. The bearded man suggests a training match with his knight and promises a good reward. The gray-haired young man is surprised by the invitation and repeats the word, training match, to himself. The Lord warns that it's not a fight to the finish and trusts he will act reasonably. With a smile on his face, Kettle says the idea of a training match sounds very good to him. He gets very excited about the idea of fighting a real knight. The young man thinks it's a great chance to see a knight's technique up close. With an excited smile full of anticipation, he thinks it's going to be thrilling. The Lord clenches his fist and thinks that a barbarian is always a barbarian in the end. He concludes that no matter how polite they pretend to be, they can't hide their love for battle. A heavy battle aura fills the room, making the Lord and his knight very tense. The scene then changes and we see a large combat arena that looks like an ancient coliseum. Sitting on his throne, the Lord observes the arena from above with a bell by his side. In the middle of the arena, the barbarian and the knight face each other, ready for the start of the combat. The knight faces his opponent with a serious and confident look, sure of his victory. Kettle, on the other hand, faces the knight with a calm smile on his face. The Lord then tells them to begin and hopes there are no serious injuries. A white-gloved hand then rings the bell to signal the start of the fight. With an air of superiority, the knight tells the barbarian to feel honored. With a smirk, the young man replies that he also prefers it that way. Annoyed, the knight becomes enraged by his opponent's relaxed attitude. The knight then releases his green aura and prepares to show his strength. With his eyes glowing, he vows to show the difference in power between them. Kettle faces the attack, and the knight asks what he's going to do to defend himself. The knight's sword then glows and multiplies into 3 blades of energy. He then lunges forward and delivers a powerful strike with the 3 swords at once. The barbarian's eyes widen slightly, surprised by the knight's technique. Shocked, he realizes there are 3 swords and wonders if it's just an illusion. The green energy glows intensely as the 3 attacks approach him. But it wasn't an illusion, and the young man splits into 3 to block the attacks. The young man wonders if this is the famous swordsmanship he so wanted to see. With a surprised look, he thinks the attack is just as he expected it to be. The knight laughs and says that narrowly dodging is the best he can do. He continues, saying that even though it's impressive, there's nothing more to see. The barbarian then clenches his fist tightly and prepares for a counter-attack. With a quick movement, he flicks his finger, deflecting the knight's sword. The knight is completely shocked and wonders what just happened. Without wasting time, Kettle charges forward and easily knocks the knight to the ground. With one hand, he grabs the knight's armored chestplate tightly. The gray-haired man then throws the knight far away with absurd strength. The knight cries out in pain from the impact of the fall. The Lord is completely shocked, his eyes white, not understanding anything. The knight's hand falls to the ground, his armor broken, showing his defeat. A large crack opens up in the arena floor from the impact of the blow. Defeated, the knight wonders how he was beaten with just a single blow. The Lord is speechless and wonders what kind of overwhelming power this is. The barbarian then steps firmly on the ground, looking quite satisfied with the fight. With a smile on his face, he looks at the Lord and asks if the fight is over. The bearded man is speechless and just stares at the gray-haired young man. Breaking into a cold sweat, he finally replies that yes, the fight is over. He thinks the barbarian's strength is monstrous and at least superhuman level. The bearded man thinks that a barbarian with this strength could shake the balance of the world. With this in mind, he decides it might be time to inform the sword master. The Lord wonders if the sword master will be interested in the barbarian's story. Suddenly, a mysterious voice asks if he's referring to his interest in the story. The camera focuses on an open window with sunlight entering the luxurious room. An old man with white hair appears at the window and looks at the Lord with a serious gaze. The Lord looks flustered and turns his face away, seeming a bit embarrassed by the situation. The old man says his taste in hobbies remains as questionable as ever. The bearded man laughs and says you need a little entertainment in life. The old man introduces himself as Cain, the sword master, and asks about the matter. The Lord then stands up and puts his hands on the table to begin explaining. With a respectful gesture, he bows and greets the great sword master. The old man looks at the Lord with a serious gaze, waiting for his explanation. The Lord closes his eyes and prepares to tell everything that happened with the barbarian. In a room, the knight wakes up groaning in pain in his bed, still recovering. His room door opens and someone comes in to visit him in his moment of pain. The Lord appears and asks if the knight's body is feeling better already. Embarrassed, the knight replies that he'll be fine in a few days and apologizes. Cain then says it's not him the knight should be apologizing to. The old man says his foolish disciple lost to an unknown barbarian, and the knight stammers. With a serious look, Cain faces the Lord and continues talking about what happened. The camera focuses on the knight's chest, still recovering from the blow he received. The old man concludes the barbarian held back, as he didn't suffer any serious injuries. Cain says he's no ordinary barbarian and can control his strength with precision. He then concludes that if he managed to hold back, it means he's at a superhuman level. The Lord and the knight are shocked by the sword master's revelation. The bearded man swallows hard at the news and doesn't know how to react. He then asks with a bit of fear how Cain compares to the barbarian's strength. The old man says that even though he's strong, he is still a sword master and cannot be matched. The Lord comments that the barbarian didn't use an aura and yet had incredible power. Cain says that's impossible by normal methods and wonders if it's the power of the white desert. The bearded man says he didn't believe it at first, but now he sees he really did come from there. The sword master becomes thoughtful and says to himself that he's a snow barbarian. He then remembers the legendary human who came from the white desert and wonders if it's him. With an intrigued look, Cain wonders if the barbarian isn't a being of another race. We then see images of several bizarre monsters that live in the white desert. The Lord then says that's not it, and the old man is surprised by his answer. He explains that if he were of another race, he would have shown consideration for humans. The sword master then wonders why he came from the white desert, and why now. The Lord asks the old man if something is wrong, and Cain becomes thoughtful. He says it's a matter for later and complains that the emperor always asks for strange things. We see a flashback of Knights in the Snow, showing one of the emperor's absurd requests. The sword master says it's not the time to worry about that, and the Lord nervously agrees. The old man then asks if the barbarian is still in the territory, and the Lord confirms he is. The sword master then takes a step forward, preparing to leave the room. With a determined look, he decides he needs to confirm everything with his own eyes. Outside a large building, the guard asks Kettle what he's going to do now. The gray-haired young man thinks about the question for a moment and glances at the guard. The soldier then hands him a bag of coins as a reward for the duel he won. The Lord says he will no longer interfere with his activities within the territory. Kettle says having an official identity would be good to avoid problems in the future. The guard explains he can get a sponsor or become a mercenary, and Kettle gets curious. The soldier says that guild mercenaries are recognized, but Kettle considers the idea. The young man is surprised, as he didn't know there was a path like that to follow. He imagines a mercenary fighting and thinks that's the essence of a fantasy. With an excited smile, he asks where he can go to become a mercenary. The guard is a bit flustered by his excitement and says there's a guild hall. With a bright smile, the barbarian asks the soldier to take him to the place. The poor guard is completely confused by the request and stammers his agreement. A narration explains that mercenaries are seen as romantic adventurers. Many perish in dungeons or are used for dirty jobs, being the scum of society. In the guild hall, a man yells furiously and punches another guy in the face. The man who was hit falls to the ground from the impact of the blow, seeming to be in a lot of pain. Furious, the man gets up and faces his attacker, asking if he wants him to leave. The other man isn't intimidated and tells him to bring it on with an angry shout. Other mercenaries watch the fight and make bets on who will win. The fight gets even uglier, and the two start pulling each other's hair like children. A pink-haired young woman asks another how the guild's new recruits are doing. The blonde named Rosa sighs warily and complains that the new recruits are all weird. She remembers the recruits a crazy knight, a thief, and a nun no one trusts. The other young woman gets flustered, and the receptionist sighs once more, very disappointed. The young woman complains that only weird people show up and dreams of a prince to save her. Suddenly, the guild door opens, and a mysterious figure enters the hall. The receptionist hears the noise and turns to see who just arrived. She's completely shocked to see the giant figure of the barbarian standing in front of her. The gray-haired young man looks around and says that this is the guild hall. The two men who were fighting stop immediately and wonder if he's a barbarian. The other mercenaries also stand with their mouths agape, completely shocked by the visit. The young man just stares at them with a confused expression, not understanding everyone's reaction. With his arms crossed, he says he's there because he wants to become a mercenary. The receptionist is shocked and, stammering, asks what his purpose is. He explains that he wants official status, and the young woman says he needs many achievements. The young man pays 5 silver coins and says his name is Kettle, but he doesn't know his age. The receptionist says she'll put an approximate value and starts typing his data. With the registration complete, she hands him a badge and warns him never to lose it. The barbarian is silent for a moment, seeming to reflect on the badge. With a smile, he tells the receptionist to sign him up and holds the object carefully. Excited, he asks what missions are available and says he wants to start now. The young woman shows Kettle the available missions, which he looks at intently. He takes the clipboard with the missions and is shocked by the options she showed him. On the clipboard, the F-rank missions are very simple, like collecting herbs and cleaning sewers. The receptionist explains that since he's F rank, these are the only available missions. Nervously, she tries to explain that over time he'll be able to take on more difficult missions. The young woman is completely shocked and can't believe what she just heard. With his finger, he points to the herb collecting mission, leaving the young woman surprised. She asks if he's sure, and the young man says it's no problem, as it needs to be done. With a confident smile, he asks where he can find the mission's herbs. The young woman explains that he needs to go outside the village and shows him a picture of the herb. With the picture in hand, he says he understands and that he'll be back soon with a completed mission. The receptionist is shocked by his calmness and watches him with curiosity. The gray-haired young man then leaves the guild hall to complete his first mission. The two receptionists watch the scene and comment on how strange he is. The camera focuses on the red herb he needs to collect in the middle of the forest. The barbarian compares the photo with the flowers in front of him to make sure it's the right one. He wonders if the herbs are for treating wounds and finds their appearance strange. The gray-haired young man then removes his outer gear and prepares to start the mission. With a hat and gloves, he begins his first mission as a real mercenary. 1 hour later, he returns with a huge bag of herbs, and the receptionist is shocked. Excited, he asks if that amount is enough, and the young woman says it's a lot. Suddenly, the receptionist notices something very strange about the herbs he brought. She notices the herbs are in excellent condition and weren't pulled out forcefully. The young man boasts that despite his appearance, he's very delicate with his hands. The young woman then thanks him and hands him the reward, which is just 1 silver coin. The young man gets emotional because it's the first money he's earned honestly. Satisfied, he asks if he can take another mission right away to continue. The receptionist is completely shocked and can't believe he was happy with the reward. With a smile, he says the sun is still high and he wants to work as much as he can. The young woman cries and thinks that the new mercenary is also very weird like the others. He then points to the next mission, which is to clean a basement and a sewer. The receptionist thinks it's already the 3rd cleaning mission he's taken from the guild. The young woman wonders if the barbarian actually enjoys cleaning. Awkwardly, the receptionist says she'll assign the mission to him right away then. The gray-haired young man then turns and leaves to complete the new mission he took. Arriving at the location, an elderly woman stares at him with a somewhat worried expression. With a smile, he introduces himself and says he's here to clean her warehouse. The woman is completely shocked to see that a barbarian came for the cleaning job. The narration explains that moving the heavy items in the warehouse was not a problem. Afterwards, he sweeps the streets, and it was difficult at first, but he soon got the hang of it. From a distance, someone watches the gray-haired young man through a pair of binoculars. This is a disguised Kane who wonders why the barbarian is doing that. He thinks the young man is a transcendent being but is doing trivial and unimportant jobs. Kane notices that the young man isn't doing the job half-assedly in the street. On the contrary, he seems to take cleaning the streets very seriously and with dedication. The sword master is completely confused, not understanding what is happening. With a satisfied smile, the young man wipes the sweat from his forehead and feels rewarded. The scene then cuts, and we see 2 little birds singing on a tree branch. Suddenly, the gray-haired young man clenches his fist tightly, seeming to be in pain. On his foot, we see a tan line showing he's been working for a long time. Back in his room, he stares at the bag of coins he earned from his work. The camera focuses on the bag of coins he earned from his hard work all day. The receptionist thanks him for the work and says, "This is the reward for 15 missions." The gray-haired young man's eyes widen, completely surprised by the reward. With a smile, she reveals the payment is 15 silver coins for all the work. Very happy, the barbarian thanks her and says he'll be back the next day for more work. Outside, he thinks about how he'll start his 2nd day in civilization. Suddenly, a child starts crying desperately in its mother's arms. The villagers look at something with an expression of pure panic and fear on their faces. We then see that they're afraid of the barbarian who is walking calmly down the street. Noticing the commotion, the young man stops walking and observes the situation around him. He then turns his head and spots something that really catches his attention in the city. With a curious expression, he wonders if that building is a real library. Without a second thought, the young man enters the place, and the door's bell rings upon his arrival. A librarian with glasses greets him with a serious but polite expression. With a dark aura, he asks if he can read some books, and the young woman screams in fear. The camera then shows shelves full of books and one of them open on the table. Already seated, the barbarian starts reading one of the books with a satisfied smile on his face. The librarian watches him from a distance, still a little nervous about his presence there. Kane spies on him and wonders if snow barbarians have a different culture from others. The gray-haired young man continues his reading, looking very focused and at peace. The young man picks up a history book to catch up on world events. He discovers that the Empire won the war and remembers the young nobleman who helped him. The Empire's flags show that the outcome of the war was their victory. The current Empire seems very powerful and has already swallowed half of the human world. The image of a broken mirror shows that they want to swallow the entire world. With a thoughtful look, he says to himself that they want world conquest. He then changes the subject and decides to look up what he really wanted to examine. The young man picks up a book about non-human races and starts reading with interest. Excited, he thinks that the fantasies written in those books really exist here. He learns about the dwarves' cave, Mentamia, where rare ores are common. The book also mentions the fairy village of Pizarapia, a beautiful and magical place, and also the aerial city of the Celestials, Rajamira, and the elves' sanctuary, Holy Elf. With a smile, he thinks that he already has the qualification to visit the sanctuary. Suddenly, his eyes widen at new information he has just read. Shocked, he wonders if there are other places like the White Desert in the world. He discovers that there are 5 great demon realms that do not allow humans. One of them is the Silent Forest, a place that taints everything with a dark color. Another is the bottomless pit that plunges the world into the abyss of evil and despair. There is also the deep sea where primates live and breathe underwater. And finally, a deep hole where simply nothing exists in the middle of nowhere. Finally, he discovers that the 5th demon realm is the White Desert itself. He is shocked to realize how big the world really is and the dangers it holds. The young man thinks that the White Desert alone is already huge, and there are others like it. With the information he has gathered, he gets up and prepares to leave the library. With a smile, he thanks the librarian and says he confirmed what he needed to. The young woman gets completely flustered and nods, looking very nervous. The young man then leaves the library, and the door's bell rings once more on his departure. Back at the guild, he asks Rosa what missions are available for that day. The receptionist is happy to see him and hands the mission forms to the barbarian. Cain watches him from a distance and thinks that the young man's behavior is very peculiar. With a determined look, he decides that he needs to meet the barbarian face to face. The scene cuts, and we see the city at night with the full moon shining in the sky. The gray-haired young man walks down the deserted street after a long day of work. Satisfied, he thinks that he completed 10 more missions that day and is very happy. With a smile, he looks at the bag of coins and thinks that it's quite profitable. He walks alone down the street and thinks that he'll soon be recognized as a mercenary. Suddenly, he stops walking and senses a strange presence watching him closely. The young man turns and faces the mysterious figure watching him from the street corner. A man in green hood stares at him with a serious look and a very dark expression. The mysterious figure then reveals himself and stares at the barbarian with a piercing gaze. The young man accuses him of being the guy who's been following him all day, and Cain is shocked. With his arms crossed, he asks what the old man wants, and he's shocked to have been noticed. The sword master thinks that he hid his presence, and that it would be impossible to notice him. Kettle becomes alert and prepares for a possible attack from the mysterious man. The old man still doesn't understand how the young man managed to notice his presence on the street. The gray-haired young man deduces that he's a thief, and that even with security, some still exist. Cain tries to explain himself but wonders if the barbarian would believe he's a sword master. Kettle looks at him and thinks the economy must not be good for an old man to have to steal. The young man then starts to think about how he'll handle the situation and the supposed thief. With a mischievous smile, he thinks that if he captures him, he might get some good achievements. The sword master is confused by the barbarian's reaction and doesn't understand what he's thinking. The old man thinks that being mistaken for a thief could be a good opportunity for him. He then clenches his fist and decides to confront the barbarian to learn about his power. The gray-haired young man takes a step forward, preparing for the imminent combat. The sword master also prepares for the fight, and an aura of power envelops him. Suddenly, the gray-haired young man crouches down to attack with incredible speed. The hooded man looks around the street and can't believe the barbarian suddenly vanished. His eyes widen in surprise as he realizes the young man simply disappeared. Suddenly, Kettle appears in front of him with his purple eyes glowing with power. He then lunges forward with his hand open to attack the sword master with all he has. The old man thinks that if he stands still, he'll grab his neck and break everything. A green aura envelops him, and he manages to narrowly dodge the barbarian's attack. Kettle is a little surprised by the sword master's speed in combat. With a smile, he compliments the old man's speed as he moves away from his attack. Cain is shocked because he was almost caught and thinks the situation is impossible. He's shocked because he couldn't feel any flow of aura coming from the barbarian. The gray-haired young man finds it interesting and wonders how he moves so fast. The swordmaster swallows hard and thinks it's no longer time to test him. With a green aura around him, the old man decides he's going to fight with all he has. The young man also prepares, and a purple aura begins to envelop him for the combat. Suddenly, Kettle disappears, and the sword master is confused, not understanding what happened. In an instant, the barbarian appears in front of him and grabs him with absurd strength. The old man is shocked because he couldn't react even with his heightened senses. The young man's hand squeezes his arm tightly, and the old man groans in pain from the grip. He feels as if his arm is caught in a rock, and his body is dragged along. With a pained expression, he wonders what kind of absurd strength this is. The young man then grinds his teeth, preparing to show his true power. The sword master releases his aura and manages to break free from the barbarian's grip. Kettle realizes there's no way to compete in terms of raw power with the old man, so he clenches his fist and prepares to use a new strategy in the fight. A green aura explosion hits the barbarian head-on, but he seems to feel nothing. The explosion is so strong that it creates a large wave of blue energy in the middle of the street. The sword master jumps back quickly and observes the scene carefully. He looks at his hand and wonders how the young man managed to withstand that attack. With a serious look and a bit of sweat on his face, he faces the barbarian on the other side. Kettle says that thieves nowadays have all sorts of skills, and the old man gets irritated. Cain thinks that manifesting mana is something only the highest level individuals can do. He's confused because the young man truly believes it's a thief's technique. The sword master is flustered and completely speechless at the situation. He thinks that manifesting mana can tear through steel, but the barbarian doesn't have a scratch. With a confident smile, Kettle faces him, not looking shaken at all. Kane wonders what kind of body he has to withstand mana with his bare skin. He then decides he needs to end the fight as quickly as possible and draws his sword. The sword master holds his sword firmly and prepares for the final attack. Suddenly his eyes widen, not understanding what is happening. With a quick movement, the gray-haired young man catches the tip of his sword. Kane is completely shocked and speechless at the barbarian's speed. With clenched teeth, he cries out in pain at what happened next in the fight. The gray-haired young man simply breaks the tip of the sword master's sword. The old man is shocked, his eyes wide, unable to believe what he saw. With his purple eyes glowing, he faces the old man with a very dark expression. Defeated, the sword master says that's as far as he can go in the fight. The gray-haired young man then moves forward and prepares for the final blow on the old man. With a calm look, he approaches the sword master to finish the fight. He then knocks the old man out and takes him to the guard station to turn him in. The guard is shocked and wonders what the heck the barbarian is doing there. Kettle then drops the old man on the floor, who falls in a very humiliating and funny way. The sword master lies there, looking very defeated and powerless. The guard wonders what's happening and why the sword master is there. He wonders if the barbarian attacked the sword master and what will happen. The soldier is completely speechless upon hearing that the young man captured a thief. Excited, Kettle asks if turning in the thief counts as a mercenary achievement. The guard is completely confused by the situation and screams in despair. The poor soldier can't believe the scene happening in front of him. He thinks of Kane, who reached the realm of transcendence, a legendary warrior. And now he's here, captured by a barbarian in a very humiliating way. The guard tries to explain that this person is not a real thief. Kettle asks if they know each other and says he looks like a known criminal. Suddenly, the soldier takes a step forward, preparing to introduce himself. With a respectful gesture, he bows and pays his respects to the sword master. The gray-haired young man is confused, and the sword master looks very embarrassed. Kettle can't believe it and asks if the thief is such a grand title. He insists that the old man is a thief and that he attacked him to steal his silver coins. The guard denies it and says there's no mistaking the face of the famous sword master. The young man wonders if sword master isn't just another term for thief. The soldier is completely speechless and asks what he means by that. Kettle then asks if he really is a sword master, and the guard confirms that he is. With few options, the poor soldier decides he'll inform the lord about the situation. Upon hearing the news, the bearded man slams the table, shocked, and asks if Kane was defeated. The lord's eyes go white, completely panicked by the unexpected news. Awkwardly, the young man apologizes and says he should have heard the whole story. The old man replies that it's also his fault for not explaining himself properly before. In a comical panel, the two sit across from each other in awkward silence. The lord thinks that Kane's defeat was unexpected and doesn't know what to do now. He thinks that Kane was defeated by the barbarian and that the details aren't important. The bearded man concludes that the barbarian is much stronger than a sword master. He remembers that Kane recently became a sword master and is the weakest one. Even so, defeating a sword master makes him an uncontrollable existence. The lord thinks the whole situation gives him a headache and doesn't know what to do. He then says it was a misunderstanding and that the two need to talk first. The lord then leaves the room and leaves the two alone to talk. The two sit across from each other in a very awkward silence. The gray-haired young man stares at the old man with a serious expression and a hint of pity. Kane drinks some tea and thinks the defeat was humiliating and his pride was wounded. He then puts the cup on the table and decides to introduce himself properly. With his hand on his chest, he introduces himself as Kane, the sword master of this kingdom. Kettle asks if sword master is his last name, and the old man explains that it isn't. The young man then asks if the technique he used is that of a sword master. The old man looks a bit flustered and doesn't know what to answer the young man. With a green aura in his hand, he asks if the barbarian is referring to that ability. Kettle is amazed by the display of power, and his eyes shine with excitement. He says he thought it was a thief's technique, but as a sword master's, it's interesting. Kane explains that it's the manifestation of mystic energy and is also called an aura. The young man remembers the fight and realizes that what he felt was the old man's aura. Excited, he stands up and asks how he can learn to use that technique. The old man explains that he needs to control and manifest the mystic energy in his body. Kettle asks if mystic energy is like the mana from the games he used to play. Kane explains that the mystic energy is the energy itself and that mages use it as mana. With a sly smile, the young man concludes that mages and swordsmen use mystic energy. With an innocent look, he asks if the old man can teach him how to use the technique. With an intimidating look, he begs the sword master to teach him the technique. Kane is surprised and asks why he wants to learn it if he's already stronger than him. The young man explains that he knows nothing about mystic energy or swordsmanship and fights ignorantly. The old man thinks that even though he was defeated, he is a sword master and didn't even draw his sword. With a mischievous smile, he decides he will teach the barbarian to regain his self-esteem. Kane then agrees to teach the young man with a confident smile on his face. He explains that without his sword, he's only at half of his full strength. Kettle says he thought he was weak, but now understands it's because of the sword. Annoyed, the old man thinks that this rascal is underestimating him again to his face. The young man says that if he had used his sword, he might have won the fight. With a confident smile, Kettle says he's looking forward to their training. He thinks that he learned swordsmanship before, but now he's going to learn the real fantasy. Kane explains that his main characteristic is the materialization of falsehood and truth. He then remembers the fight and how the knight's sword split into three. Kettle understands what he means by materialization and seems very interested. The sword master says that swordsmanship is a technique, not brute force, and Kettle agrees. He explains that whoever reaches the end of this path becomes a true sword master. A green aura envelopes his sword, and he prepares for the demonstration of the technique. Kettle is amazed and says that's the aura he so wanted to see. The old man gets flustered and clears his throat to continue the explanation for the barbarian. The old man thinks he can't believe he's teaching swordsmanship to a barbarian. With his sword glowing, he says he will show the technique directly to the young man. With a focused look, the sword master prepares to demonstrate his power. He then delivers a powerful blow with his sword that cuts the floor with force. His attack creates several energy slashes in the air that spread across the room. Kettle is surprised and realizes that his sword strike split into 5. The wall behind him is completely destroyed by the sword master's powerful attack. The old man explains that there are many techniques that use aura to create illusions, but he boasts that only he can give substance to illusions. With a smug smile, he says it's a mystical technique, and the young man agrees. Suddenly, Kettle says he also thinks he can do the same technique as him. Kane's eyes go white, completely shocked by the barbarian's audacity. Annoyed, the old man asks what kind of nonsense he's talking about right now. He remembers that he dedicated his entire life to the sword and trained hard to get there. Kettle says it would be faster to show him directly and draws a weapon for the fight. With a confident smile, he picks up an axe, and the old man is surprised by the weapon. The gray-haired young man then stomps firmly on the ground, preparing to attack. He then assumes a combat stance and prepares to show his skill. With a swift movement, he delivers several blows with his axe in the air. The sword master is shocked and wonders if that is a sword strike. The axe blows create several energy clones that advance on the sword master. Annoyed, the old man shouts that he only moved quickly using the brute force he has. The barbarian's attack destroys the entire red carpet with impressive force. A large explosion of energy occurs, showing the power of the axe's blow. The sword master's eyes go white, completely shocked by the scene. The gray-haired young man's axe seems to be smoking from the force of the attack. With a confident smile on his face, he asks the old man what he thought. Kane thinks the blow was simultaneous like his materialization, and that he was almost fooled. He says there's no technique there, and the young man replies that the result is the same. The young man asks if it's not enough since there isn't much difference, and the old man agrees. The swordmaster thinks he's not wrong, but the situation hurts his pride. He then grips his sword tightly and prepares to show another technique. With a green aura, the old man creates several clones of himself to attack the barbarian. Kettle is shocked and wonders if the swordmaster's body has separated. The clones attack the ground with everything they've got, and a large wave of green energy spreads. Green stones are thrown into the air from the impact of the clones' coordinated attack. The attack destroys the floor and creates a huge crater in the middle of the training room. The old man explains that it's a body separation created by extreme control of the aura. With a challenging look, he asks the barbarian if he can copy that. The gray-haired young man then stomps firmly on the ground, preparing for the challenge. The gray-haired young man prepares to show his version of the technique to the old man. With his axe in hand, he begins to spin at high speed, creating a tornado. A purple aura envelops him, and several energy slashes are seen in the air with the movement. The swordmaster's eyes go white, completely shocked and speechless. The barbarian's attack creates a huge tornado of purple energy that destroys everything around it. The energy concentrates and forms a large whirlpool of power and destruction. The tornado of purple energy rises to the ceiling, showing the barbarian's absurd power. With a confident smile, he stops the attack and asks what the old man thought of the technique. Kane falls to his knees, completely defeated and shocked by what he just saw. The gray-haired young man looks at him with a confused expression, not understanding the reaction. The old man starts to cry and laments his swordsmanship, which he trained for his entire life. On his knees on the floor, he says it's impossible and can't believe it. The swordmaster cries rivers of tears, completely devastated by the defeat. Kettle says the old man's mental strength is weaker than he previously imagined. He then approaches the swordmaster to talk with him for a bit. With a tear running down his face, the old man composes himself and faces the barbarian. Kettle says he just swung the axe quickly and that it's not real swordsmanship. Kane explains that he can never achieve the mystic arts in the genuine sense of the word. Breaking into a cold sweat, he tries to convince himself that his swordsmanship still has great value. With his clones, he boasts that only he can materialize falsehood and truth. With fire in his eyes, he says it's not a problem with his sword technique. Annoyed, the old man says that the barbarian is the crazy one for being so strong. He wonders how a human can move so fast without using aura. The gray-haired young man asks if he can teach the technique in the true sense. The swordmaster apologizes for getting emotional, and the young man says he understands. Kane then clears his throat and composes himself to continue the conversation with the barbarian. He explains that to use the technique properly, one must first manipulate the aura. The old man continues, saying that no one can reach great heights without the mystic arts. Kettle understands and asks if divine power is a separate thing from the mystic arts. Kane confirms this and explains that miracles are granted directly by the lords. The gray-haired young man finally understands the difference between the two powers. The mystic arts are the mysterious power within everyone, and how it's used determines everything. To obtain the powers of fantasy, one must first understand these mystic arts. The old man explains that the most basic stage is sensing the mystic energy in the body. Kettle asks if anyone can sense the mystic energy, and the old man says no. Kane reveals that those who can sense the mystic energy are called third class. There are 5 grades based on the ability to manipulate the mystic energy in the body. He explains that the 5 classifications are third, second, and first class, transcendent, and hero. The young man remembers his conversation with the young noblewoman and finally understands everything. Kane warns that it's just a division for convenience and that there are gaps. Kettle says he understands, and the sword master says they should begin the training. With an imposing look, he begins the first stage, which is sensing the mystic energy. He tells the young man to expand his senses and feel the mystic energy within his body. Kane instructs him to feel the wind and the touch of the earth to awaken his new sense. The gray-haired young man closes his eyes and concentrates to feel the mystic energy. With a purple aura around him, the young man tries to feel the mystic energy with concentration. The aura turns red, and he strains to the utmost to feel the energy in his body. He opens his eyes and says he can't feel anything, leaving the sword master shocked. Awkwardly, the old man says he thought someone so strong would feel the mystic energy easily. He thinks that usually, strong people without mana have a better chance of sensing the mystic arts. Kane strokes his beard and wonders if it's a peculiarity of the people from the White Desert. Kettle says he doesn't know, as no one there could sense the so-called mystic arts. The sword master then decides to use his power to open the path of the mystic arts. The young man gets excited and asks if he's going to transfer aura to him like in games. Kane says it's something similar and prepares for the procedure he's about to perform. Excited, Kittle asks him to do it quickly, and the old man agrees somewhat awkwardly. The sword master then stands up and prepares to transfer his aura to him. He asks the young man to relax and focus his senses on his own flesh to feel it. With his hand on his shoulder, the old man begins to transfer his mana to the barbarian. Suddenly, his eyes go white, and he wonders what kind of body this is. Annoyed, the old man wonders if that body truly belongs to a real human being. He thinks the young man's body feels like a solid rock and wonders how much muscle is there. The young man calls Kane's name, not understanding what is happening with the old man. Awkwardly, the sword master apologizes and says he got distracted for a moment. He then prepares to channel his aura and awaken the mystic energy in the young man's body. Suddenly, he stops and stares at the barbarian with an expression of pure confusion on his face. With a surprised look, the old man says there is something very wrong with the situation. He reveals that he can't find the path to the mystic arts within his body. With a defeated expression, he says he can't reach the young man's mystic energy. Kane feels if he's swimming in an abyssal sea, unable to see anything. With his eyes closed, he says it won't work and gives up trying for now. The gray-haired young man is startled by the news and doesn't understand what happened. Desperate, he asks if this means he has no talent for the mystic arts. The old man denies it and explains that channeling aura won't work on the barbarian's body. He says he needs to find the path and awaken the dormant power in his body. Kettle says he knows that and is confused by the sword master's explanation. The old man reveals that he couldn't find the path to the mystic arts in his body. Shocked, the young man asks if this means he can't sense the mystic arts. Kane explains that's not it, and that he couldn't even check for the mystic energy. He then reveals that the barbarian's body is like that of an alien, and the young man is shocked. Kane explains that his aura couldn't even enter the barbarian's body. Shocked, he thinks it's the first time that pure physical strength has blocked aura. Disappointed, the young man realizes that not even a sword master can help him. He asks if he can't obtain the mystic arts, and the old man says it's hard to say. Kane suggests he seek out other sword masters or a mage's tower. With a hand on his chest, the old man apologizes, and the young man says it's alright. Kettle thinks there's still a possibility and that for now it's enough. The gray-haired young man then prepares to thank the sword master. With a smile, he says he learned many things and thanks him for his help. Kane watches him in silence, seeming to reflect on the barbarian's personality. He thinks that all the barbarians he's met were uncontrollable and violent. But he realizes that this barbarian in front of him is completely different. With a serious look, the old man asks if he has any interest in settling in the kingdom. Kane suggests he swear loyalty and receive a prominent position in the kingdom. He offers to be his patron and says he would receive a high position. The gray-haired young man refuses the offer and says he has no intention of belonging to anything. The old man thinks that with the barbarian, they could escape the empire's dominion. Kane tries to convince him, saying he could obtain the status of a noble in the kingdom. The gray-haired young man just stares at him in silence, seeming to think about the proposal. With a smile, he says he'll enjoy his own amusements for now. The sword master narrows his eyes, seemingly making an important decision. Awkwardly, he says he understands the young man's decision and won't insist further. With a smile, Kettle thanks him and says he won't forget the favor he did. Kane watches him in silence, still seeming a bit shocked by the situation. The old man then turns and starts to walk away, leaving the barbarian behind. Alone in the hallway, he thinks that he had an absurd thought about the young man. He realizes the barbarian acts on his own will and is impossible to control. Kane concludes that he might be even more troublesome than the other barbarians. Sighing, he thinks the whole situation is very complicated and doesn't know what to do. He remembers that the Emperor wishes to conquer the demon realms and grows concerned. The Lord is shocked and wonders if the Sword Master is being serious. Kane confirms that he is and that feudal lives are being sacrificed by the Emperor. Annoyed, he wonders if the Emperor wants to be the reincarnation of the ancient Emperor. The old man says they haven't even conquered all the human territory yet. The Lord concludes that war will eventually reach this territory. Kane warns that since this is Imperial territory, recruitment could come at any moment. He complains that the world is already strange and the half-crazy Emperor only makes it worse. The Lord faces the Sword Master with a serious expression and a bit of concern. He then asks if the rumors about the demons are actually true. Cain confirms this and reveals that the demons' movements are beginning to appear. The Lord's eyes widen, completely shocked by the old man's revelation. Cain continues, saying that the frequency of dungeons is also out of the ordinary. He concludes that something is happening and that it's nothing good for the humans. The Sword Master remembers that the strangest thing of all is already here. With a serious look, the Lord nods his head, seeming to reflect on everything. Cain asks what he thinks of the situation, and the Lord says he doesn't know what to think. He says the barbarian doesn't seem hostile, but beyond that, he can't say anything. The scene cuts, and we see the city during the day with a red flag waving. Kettle walks down the street and notices that people are afraid of his presence. The gray-haired young man's eyes widen slightly at the people's reaction. He notices a mother and her child hiding from him in fear as he passes by on the street. The residents stare at him with an expression of dread and quickly move away from him. The gray-haired young man becomes thoughtful and tries to understand the reason for their fear. He then deduces that people are scared because of his strange clothes. Kettle concludes that they probably think he's a lunatic and don't want to get close. With a determined look, the gray-haired young man decides what he's going to do next. Excited, he clenches his fist and decides he's going to buy civilized clothes to wear. We then see a clothing store with various colorful fabrics and elegant suits. The young man enters the store, and the door's bell rings upon his arrival at the establishment. A tailor greets him with a polite smile and an elegant suit on a mannequin. Upon seeing the young man up close, the tailor's eyes go white, completely panicked. With a dark aura, he says he'd like to buy some clothes, and the tailor is shocked. Desperate, the man says he doesn't have clothes in his size and starts to cry. Kettle finds this situation problematic, but the tailor offers to make custom clothes. The young man is happy with the possibility and asks the tailor to make the clothes for him. The man agrees and says he will let him know when the clothes are ready. Terrified, he imagines a furious barbarian and wonders if he'll survive if he doesn't like them. On the way to the guild, Kettle stops walking when he spots something strange on the ground. He sees a small, glowing blue sphere on the ground and becomes very curious about the object. The gray-haired young man then bends down and picks up the small sphere to look at it more closely. He wonders if it's a gemstone and observes it carefully, looking at the details. The blue sphere glows with a mysterious energy and seems very valuable to him. The gray-haired young man becomes thoughtful and can't identify what the object is. He then decides he'll ask about the sphere at the guild hall to find out. Arriving at the guild, he asks Rosa if she knows what that object is. He hands the sphere to the receptionist and says he found it on the way there. The gray-haired young man comments that the sphere doesn't look like any ordinary object. Rosa says it doesn't look like a gemstone and that the surface is very smooth and polished. She notices there's no name engraved on it and that the sphere seems very valuable. With a serious look, she stares at the sphere and seems to recognize what the object is. Suddenly, he notices something strange and snaps his fingers in front of the receptionist. The young woman's eyes blink and she seems to come to her senses after a strange trance. She is confused and doesn't understand what happened the last few seconds there. Kettle asks if she's alright, and the young woman blinks, not understanding his question. He explains that she seemed hypnotized by the sphere, and the receptionist is confused. The gray-haired young man tells her to forget it, and changes the subject back to the sphere. The young woman says she feels a strange energy coming from the sphere and offers to appraise it. Kettle refuses the offer, and says he'll find out on his own, because it would be more fun. He then asks what missions are available for that day at the guild. She hands him the clipboard with the missions, which are again very simple and trivial. With a blushing smile, he takes the clipboard and prepares for another day of work. The scene cuts, and we see his room's window during the calm, starry night. The bag of coins he earned from his work is on top of a wooden table. Lying in bed, he sighs with satisfaction and thinks it was another rewarding day. He then picks up the blue sphere and wonders what it really is. The young man remembers that Rosa seemed to have lost her mind because of the sphere. Suddenly, he feels something strange and his eyes widen with a sensation. A mysterious voice echoes in his mind and calls for him to come to it from somewhere. The voice keeps calling, and he wonders what it is and if he's supposed to go somewhere. With a mischievous smile, he thinks that the sphere is even transmitting a map to him. The mysterious voice continues to call the gray-haired young man to come to it. He becomes thoughtful for a moment and stares at the glowing blue sphere in his hand. Looking out the window, he wonders if he should follow the call of the mysterious voice. Annoyed with the voice, he tells it to be quiet because he's already on his way. The gray-haired young man then walks through the dark forest, following the map. Suddenly, he stops walking and notices something strange in the middle of the forest. He arrives at the entrance of a dark cave and wonders if it's the right place. A smile forms on his face as he prepares to enter the cave. Inside the cave, a hooded figure with glowing eyes watches him from the darkness. Kettle says he has arrived and asks where the main body that called him there is. A voice says that another sacrifice has entered, and a blue aura envelops the barbarian. The voice says that this time it's a barbarian, and that he will be good material for a sacrifice. A giant, hooded skeleton watches him with a sinister and frightening smile. He is in a magical ritual and seems to be preparing for his resurrection. The narration explains that in the past, an evil sorcerer controlled kings and kingdoms. He was defeated by heroes but transferred his soul to a life vessel. With this, he became a lich and immortal being until his vessel is destroyed. The sorcerer became a lich and began to plan his resurrection in the world. He spread enchanted spheres to gather sacrifices for his dark ritual. With the sacrifices, he would create the mana core for his resurrection and domination. The lich wonders why a barbarian is there, as the territory is very remote. He concludes that because it's a remote place, the existence of a barbarian is very strange. With a sinister look, he says the barbarian will be excellent material for a sacrifice. He reveals that only those who do not master the mystic arts can be enchanted by the spheres. The lich concludes that the barbarian is just some fool who doesn't know about the mystic arts. He then calls for the young man to become the cornerstone of his great resurrection. The gray-haired young man approaches the cave door and wonders if it's the right place. He faces the giant wooden door and prepares to enter the lich's lair. The gray-haired young man then steps firmly on the ground and opens the cave door. His eyes widen in surprise when he sees the dark figure of the lich in front of him. The skeleton holds its staff firmly and faces the barbarian with its blue eyes. The lich assumes an imposing posture and faces the gray-haired young man in silence. Kettle is shocked and amazed to be in the presence of a real lich. He thinks that a lich is the pinnacle of sorcerers and a classic fantasy villain. The lich asks what kind of creature he is and how he wasn't enchanted by the sphere. Kettle understands that this is how he brought people to his dark lair. The lich doesn't sense the mystic arts in him and deduces that he has a mental protection artifact. He wonders how a barbarian obtained such a rare and powerful artifact. The skeleton says the young man was lucky to find an artifact, but he denies it. Annoyed, the lich asks if he thinks he can fool him and releases his energy. He says that if the young man had surrendered, he would have gone without any pain or suffering. The lich then summons several skeletons to attack the barbarian with full force. With a gesture, he orders his skeleton servants to attack the cave's intruder. One of the skeletons leaps into the air and lunges towards the gray-haired young man. Kettle says he understands what's happening and that it's a lich's dungeon. The skeleton tries to hit him with its sword, but the young man dodges with ease. With a single blow, he destroys the skeleton, which dissolves into dust particles. The gray-haired young man says he thought the dungeon would be more challenging. The lich clenches his teeth tightly, completely furious at the barbarian's audacity. He sends more skeletons to attack and says he'll see if he keeps talking. The gray-haired young man faces the skeletons with a serious and focused expression. He then clenches his fist and prepares for combat against the lich's servants. With a single punch, he destroys several skeletons at once with his strength. He continues to fight and defeats the skeletons with a combination of punches and kicks. With a powerful punch, he launches one of the skeletons into the air with force. The skeletons shatter from the barbarian's blows as he fights relentlessly. The lich is left with his mouth agape, completely shocked by the young man's strength. Kettle steps on the remains of a skeleton and says that, as Casson said, they fall without a head. He thinks that being a lich, the enemy would control death knights or undead. Suddenly, the lich points his staff at the barbarian and prepares a spell. Annoyed, the lich says his mercy ends here and prepares for an attack. The crystal on his staff glows with an intense and powerful blue energy. Suddenly, a skeleton knight with horns appears, surrounded by a blue aura. The gray-haired young man's eyes widen slightly, surprised by the summon. He is surprised to see a skeleton knight there and looks at it with curiosity. Kettle thinks that since it was made by a lich, the knight might be very different. The lich then orders his skeleton knight to finish off the barbarian in front of him. The monster charges at high speed towards the young man for a powerful attack. With a smile, Kettle prepares for the fight against the skeleton knight. The monster's sword glows with blue energy as it prepares for the strike. The gray-haired young man says he's curious to see how tough it is. He then blocks the blow with his arm, and a wave of purple energy spreads out. The impact of the blow throws him back, and he slides across the cave floor. The skeleton knight is completely destroyed by the impact of the counterattack. A large cloud of dust and smoke rises with the destruction of the bone monster. The silhouette of the skeleton knight can be seen reforming in the middle of the smoke. The monster reconstructs itself and charges again towards the gray-haired young man. Kettle notices that the knight is much more durable than the normal skeletons. The lich then orders the knight to release its mana to the maximum for the next attack. A large wave of blue energy spreads through the cave from the monster's power. The gray-haired young man faces the skeleton knight with a very serious expression. The monster then transforms and becomes even stronger with the lich's power. It lunges forward and tries to pierce the barbarian with a spear of blue energy. The gray-haired young man clenches his fist and prepares for the coming combat. With a powerful punch, he destroys the energy spear and the skeleton knight. The monster is thrown back and shatters on the ground from the force of the blow. Kettle then punches the ground and creates a large crater, showing his absurd strength. The lich is shocked and can't believe his knight was defeated again. A large cloud of purple dust rises with the destruction of the bone monster. The gray-haired young man then steps on the skeleton's hand, crushing the bones. He says the monster is unusual but doesn't seem to be much different in the end. The lich asks once more what kind of creature he is and how he is so strong. He can't sense the barbarian's mystic arts or mana and is very confused. The skeleton wonders if this is just the gray-haired young man's physical power. With a look of admiration, the lich says the barbarian is a very special being. Kettle glances at him, seeming not to care much about the lich's compliment. The skeleton then decides that he will face the barbarian personally in battle. He tells the young man to feel honored to fight against him, and Kettle moves forward. Suddenly, the gray-haired young man stops and has a surprised expression. He feels a strange pressure and can't move properly in the middle of the cave. The lich asks if he's scared and tells him to fear his presence there. The skeleton says he will pay the price for invading his sacred sanctuary. Kettle says he only came there because the sphere called him an ass if he didn't spread them. The lich looks flustered and breaks into a cold sweat, completely surprised by the young man's question. The narration explains that the barbarian was lured by the sphere, just like the others. Furious, the lich boasts about having destroyed 5 kingdoms and faced heroes. The young man remembers the elven queen's name and wonders if long names are in fashion. The lich casts a powerful spell and tells the barbarian to become the cornerstone. A dark aura hits him head-on, but he seems to feel nothing from the attack. The gray-haired young man finds himself in a whirlpool of dark and powerful energy. He faces the spell with a serious expression and doesn't seem worried at all. His eyes spin, and he realizes the magic controls human emotions. It's an original spell of the lich that makes people lose their minds and go crazy. The skeleton says that a mere barbarian is powerless before his great magic. But he realizes the young man is different and doesn't seem to be using any artifacts. He then decides he will study him first and orders his servants to drag him away. A skeleton with a blue aura prepares to attack the gray-haired barbarian. The bone monster floats in the air and lunges towards him with its sword. The gray-haired young man takes a step forward and prepares for combat. The skeleton lunges and a blue aura envelops the gray-haired young man for the attack. The gray-haired young man's eyes glow with an intense and powerful purple aura. With a powerful kick, he easily destroys the skeleton and advances on the lich. The bone monster is completely destroyed by the impact of the barbarian's kick. The gray-haired young man faces the lich with a serious and determined expression. The giant skeleton is left with its mouth agape, completely shocked by the young man's strength. A large explosion of purple energy occurs, showing the power of the barbarian's blow. The lich can't believe it and wonders how the mental domination magic didn't work. Kettle says he was just observing and that the lich tried to capture him with skeletons. With a bored expression, he says the lich's strategy is very tedious. The lich becomes furious at the insult and glares at him, his eyes glowing with anger. He thinks that humans are beings that move according to their emotions. The young man asks if he can't use spells like fireball or magic missile. Annoyed, the lich prepares to show his true power to the barbarian. A large sphere of dark energy forms in front of the skeleton's staff. He commands the sphere to swallow the world and plunge the unseen into total chaos. Kettle is amazed by the display of power and his eyes shine with excitement. A wave of dark and blue energy advances towards the gray-haired young man. The lich commands the barbarian to be devoured by his powerful and dark magic. The gray-haired young man is hit head-on by the wave of dark energy. The energy dissipates, and the young man seems to have disappeared in the darkness. With a sinister laugh, the lich celebrates his victory over the barbarian. Suddenly, he feels a sharp pain and bends over, hand to his mouth. The lich seems exhausted and out of breath after using such a powerful spell. He says he overdid and used all his mana except what keeps him alive. With sweat running down his face, he composes himself and faces the smoke. Suddenly, he sees the gray-haired young man standing in front of him without a scratch. Kettle asks if this is the end, and the lich is completely shocked and speechless. He can't believe the mental domination magic didn't work. The lich thinks that no matter how great the hero, the spell should have worked. Kettle says it was impressive but that he felt nothing from his attack. The lich is terrified when he realizes the barbarian is immune to his spells. The gray-haired young man then grips the handle of his axe tightly. With a confident smile, he asks if it's his turn to attack now. The lich smiles sinisterly and says he finally understands the whole situation. The gray-haired young man stands still with his axe, completely confused by the reaction. The skeleton claims the barbarian already knew about him and came there to find him. In a comical scene, Kettle is baffled and asks what the monster is talking about. The lich starts laughing and admires the Empire's ability to track his location. He continues his monologue and says he will be resurrected and dominate the world once more. The skeleton believes Kettle came from a place where human talents are cultivated. He imagines the young man is an assassin sent by the Empire just to take him out. The lich shouts that even if that's true, he won't let himself be defeated so easily. Introducing himself as Kardos, he vows to defeat the young man and bring down the Empire. Kettle remains clueless and wonders if the skeleton has gone completely mad. Suddenly, a strange jar begins to float in the air with a glowing, bluish aura. The lich desperately screams for the barbarian to give him his body immediately. A large blast of energy hits Kettle head-on, who falls to the ground from the impact. With his eyes white, the gray-haired young man seems confused and unresponsive to the attack. The skeleton reveals his plan to devour the barbarian's mind and use his body forever. Suddenly, a sinister laugh echoes, and the young man gets up with a bluish aura. A voice says that this body is now his and that the possession was a success. Inside Kettle's mental realm, the lich is shocked and doesn't understand what happened. He wonders what kind of inner world this is and realizes something is wrong. The lich feels his mind corrupting and crumbling just by being in this place. He then spots the Empire's flags and wonders if they are responsible for this. In a panic, the skeleton immediately denies it as he realizes it's not the Empire. A dark figure of the barbarian appears, and he thinks that not even the Empire would create such a being. Desperate, the lich feels his mind dissolving and screams in pure terror. The skeleton's body begins to dissolve, and these were his last words. Back in the real world, Kittle scratches his head and doesn't understand why he suddenly passed out. The body of the powerful lich falls to the ground, completely defeated and lifeless. The young man thinks the magic was cool but that a lich should be stronger. He was very much looking forward to seeing the spells the skeleton sorcerer would use. Kettle then picks up the jar the lich was using and observes it with great curiosity. He thinks that the liches of this world are not as impressive as he imagined. The gray-haired young man then picks up the skeleton's staff, which was glowing with magic. With the staff in hand, he wonders if he could use magic with it too. Suddenly, the young man has an idea and gets a very funny, surprised look on his face. With a mischievous smile, he decides he will secretly take the staff with him. Suddenly, he stops and seems to remember something else important. The young man thinks that if the staff belonged to the lich, that jar could be its vessel. He then decides he will ask the receptionist Rosa to appraise the mysterious object. Satisfied with the items, he prepares to leave the cave with his new treasures. Suddenly, the gray-haired young man notices something and stops walking immediately. In front of him, he spots a wall with a huge, glowing magic circle on it. Excited, he wonders if that happens to be a secret room in the dungeon. Out of curiosity, the young man then extends his hand and touches the wall with his finger. The wall begins to tremble and slowly opens, revealing a dark passage. With a surprised look on his face, he realizes he really did find a secret room. Without a second thought, the gray-haired young man enters the room to see what's inside. To his surprise, he finds several people floating in the air, unconscious. They seem to be in a deep sleep and float as if they have no weight. The barbarian looks at the bodies and realizes they are the sacrifices of the lich Kardos. With a goofy smile on his face, he is happy to have found a secret room. He then begins to count the people and reaches a very large number. The gray-haired young man wonders where all these people came from. Suddenly, one of the men wakes up and grabs the barbarian's hand tightly. A blonde young woman also wakes up and whispers in his ear, startling the young man. In a comical scene, he wonders what the heck he's going to do with so many people. With a determined look, he decides he will return to the territory to ask for help. He thinks that if he explains the situation, they will probably send reinforcements. The scene cuts, and we see the guild's doorbell ringing upon his arrival. The gray-haired young man enters the hall and walks towards the receptionist. The receptionist Rosa greets him with a smile and calls him by his name. With a confident smile, he says he arrived early because he had some things to take care of. The young woman is completely confused and wonders what kind of business he would have. With a smile, the young man reveals that the business was about the sphere he showed her yesterday. The receptionist laughs and says it's a joke, as she doesn't take the story seriously. The young man insists it's not a joke, and she wonders how a lich could be in such a remote place. Suddenly, he slams the purple jar on the table, leaving the young woman completely surprised. With a sinister look, he says he brought the lich's vessel and asks her to appraise it. The poor receptionist is completely in shock, unable to process the information. With a startled face, she finally realizes he wasn't joking with her. Desperate, the young woman freaks out, and he reveals that he found several people in the secret room. He says he left them there and asks the guild for help, leaving the young woman speechless. Suddenly, she remembers the disappearances and realizes it was because of the lich. The young woman panics and shouts desperately that she'll call someone right away. A guard then bursts in, shouting and asking what the heck is going on with the lich. With a casual wave, the gray-haired young man greets the guard who just arrived. He tells the soldier not to worry because it's already over and wasn't a big deal. The soldier shouts the lich's full name, and the young man confirms that was indeed the name. Kettle asks if he knows him, and the guard shouts that he certainly knows him very well. A narration explains that Kardos was a sorcerer who destroyed 5 kingdoms 100 years ago. The guard is completely shocked and asks if the story is really true. The young man says it wasn't impressive, and that the lich did something strange and self-destructed. The soldier finds it impossible that Kardos would have self-destructed and asks for more details. With a confused look, the gray-haired young man says he has nothing more to say. The poor soldier is completely speechless at the barbarian's vague answer. With few options, the soldier decides he needs to report everything to the Lord immediately. Now in the throne room, the Lord is shocked that a lich was so close to his territory. The bearded man then asks if there's no possibility it was another type of monster. The guard says the possibility is low because they have the victim's testimonies and evidence. The bearded man then stares at the jar and remembers that it is the lich's vessel. The situation is so serious that Imperial investigators should be called immediately. With his eyes closed, the Lord sighs wearily and says the situation has become very complicated. He then slams his hand on the table and orders someone to be prepared to be sent to the kingdom. Near the window, the bearded man reflects and says that in the end, they were very lucky. The soldier agrees and says that if the barbarian hadn't found him, the territory would have been the sacrifice. The narration explains that Kardos became a lich and was preparing for his resurrection. The guard concludes that's why the situation wasn't normal, and the Lord agrees with him. The bearded man says it was a great feat and that Kettle deserves a fitting reward. Alone, he reflects and wonders if his territory can provide such a large reward. The scene then cuts to the Lord's bedroom window with the bright morning sun shining. Suddenly, a maid comes running desperately into the room, calling for the Lord. He has just woken up and is still in his pajamas and slippers, looking very sleepy. The bearded man realizes something serious has happened and tells the maid to enter. The large bedroom doors then open with a bright light coming from outside. The young woman panics and announces that the Hirzi Inquisitor has arrived in the territory. The bearded man is completely shocked by the news and can't believe what he heard. The camera then focuses on the long, white hair of the mysterious Inquisitor who has arrived. Awkwardly, the Lord asks why such an important person would be there in his territory. The Hirzi Inquisitor of the Sun Lord then appears with an aura of pure elegance. Now in a luxurious room, the two sit down to talk about the unexpected visit. The bearded man formally introduces himself as Luke Barkin, the lord of that territory. The young woman thanks him for the reception and apologizes for the sudden, unannounced visit. She then introduces herself as Aquaz, the inquisitor who judges the heretics of the Sun Lord. A narration explains that she is the youngest and most powerful inquisitor on the entire continent. Her power and authority are so great that they surpass even those of a lord of a nation. The young woman then comments that the territory seems to be very tumultuous and agitated lately. The lord explains that they had a small problem with a dungeon, but they have resolved everything. He then asks the reason for her visit, and she reveals she came to talk about a divine oracle. The bearded man is shocked by the revelation, and the young woman continues with a smirk. Before talking about the oracle, she asks to first confirm what happened in the territory. The bearded man feels awkward and hesitates to answer the inquisitor's question. The young woman then asks if he is referring to the barbarian and the fearsome lich that appeared. With a worried look, the lord confirms it and says it was the famous sorcerer Cardos. We then see an image of the powerful lich in his dark and frightening lair. Shocked, the inquisitor asks what he means by that being was here. The lord then shows the lich's vessel as proof of what happened at the location. With her eyes wide, the young woman can't believe it and wonders what on earth happened. The inquisitor then clutches her necklace tightly, looking very tense about the situation. Looking to the side, she asks if by any chance the barbarian is still in the territory. The bearded man confirms and replies that he is still staying there. She wonders if it's possible that a barbarian defeated the powerful Cardos. The lord confirms and reveals that even the sword master was defeated by him. The young woman then asks to which tribe the new and powerful barbarian belongs. Breaking into a cold sweat, the bearded man reveals that he claims to have come from the White Desert. She can't believe it and wonders how a being from the demon realm managed to get out. With narrowed eyes, the inquisitor begins to think of a new possibility. She then reveals that perhaps the barbarian is the reason she came there. With a determined look, the young woman asks if she can meet the barbarian directly. Meanwhile, at a room, Kittle stares at a table with mugs in a jar. The gray-haired young man wonders how exactly he can use that thing. He then observes the glowing blue crystal he took from the lich's staff in his hand. Lying down, he thinks the item seemed like a magical artifact and decides to ask some mages later. Suddenly, the gray-haired young man seems to remember something very important. Looking out the window, he thinks it's about time for something to happen. A guard knocks on the door and informs him that the inquisitor wants a meeting with him at the church. The soldier warns him to be especially polite when he meets this person. With a confident smile, the gray-haired young man tells the guard not to worry. The young man then walks past the soldier, who watches him with a very nervous expression. Arriving at the meeting place, the soldier greets him with a serious and focused look. With a determined expression, the man prepares to take him to the inquisitor. With his arms crossed and a confident smile, the barbarian says they can leave. A narration explains that in this world, the lords grant power or descend themselves. The place where the servants of these lords gather is the church in this fantasy world. The soldier then announces that they have finally reached their final destination and points. In front of him, the gray-haired young man sees a huge and beautiful white church. Impressed, he wonders if that really is the church of the Sun Lord. The soldier explains that someone will guide him as soon as he enters the sacred place. The gray-haired young man then prepares himself and walks towards the church entrance. Upon entering, he is surprised by the beauty and grandeur of the place's interior. Several statues of a woman with a serene countenance decorate the inside of the church. Inside the church, we see several wooden pews illuminated by the sunlight. Soon, 3 nuns greet him and welcome the gray-haired young man. One of them then informs him that Lady Aquaz is waiting for him for the meeting. With a surprised look, the barbarian agrees, and the nun offers to guide him. Arriving in the room, he says it's a pleasure to finally meet her in person. The white-haired young woman then introduces herself as Aquaz, the Inquisitor of the Sun Lord. The young man introduces himself as Kettle the Barbarian and thinks she's very young for the position. With a smirk, he then concludes that she must be very skilled. The Inquisitor is completely confused by his laugh and wonders what that means. Without wasting time, the barbarian asks why she called him there. The white-haired young woman hesitates a bit and looks away, seeming somewhat flustered. She reveals that the matter is about the lich he defeated, as it was a great evil. The Inquisitor continues, explaining that only heroes could have stopped that sorcerer. The young man says he heard about that, but the lich he saw just destroyed itself on its own. He notices she doesn't believe his words, but says he's only telling what he saw. The young woman then suggests that the Sun Lord observe the conversation, and he is confused. She explains that if he lies, a negative reaction will appear, like a lie detector. Thinking he will refuse, the young woman is surprised when the young man asks why he would refuse. Excited, he sees this as a golden opportunity to feel divine authority up close. With a goofy smile on his face, he seems to be having fun and she is shocked. The Inquisitor asks if the proposal doesn't make him uncomfortable with the situation. The gray-haired young man asks why it would be uncomfortable since he has nothing to hide. He then states with confidence that he hasn't told a single lie up to that point. Awkwardly, the white-haired young woman closes her eyes and decides to proceed. With her hands together, she begins to pray and a golden aura envelopes her entire body. The young woman asks her lord to reveal with his gaze all falsehoods present there. Suddenly, a pair of bright, golden eyes appears in the darkness, observing everything. A great blast of golden light descends from the sky and hits the church with great force. Bathed in the golden light, the gray-haired young man says he can feel something strange. The young man can then feel the presence of a being that is beyond the light itself. He sees a giant figure that cannot be described with human language. The barbarian faces the presence and senses that its emotion is pure bewilderment. With a perplexed look, the entity seems not to understand what is happening there. Suddenly, the great golden light begins to recede and disappears from inside the church. With sweat running down her face, the Inquisitor says that fortunately, there was no negative reaction. She then composes herself and warns that from this point on, no lies will be permitted. With a focused gaze, the gray-haired young man looks at her in complete silence. The barbarian then responds with a confident smile that he understood the situation.